A quorum at this time, so we will go into recess until we have a quorum. And I wrote big here, recess, not adjourn. That kind of scares me if I make that mistake. So we are in recess. Tax working group committee together for back to order. And we'll call the House Tax Working Group back to order. We're going to be working off of House Offer 2, and that was last night. It did not pass. I'd like to go through each item down to the TIF section. And the updated spreadsheet is dated 5/22/2025, 3:35 p.m. We'll make sure everybody has that. So we're working off the same document. So what I'd like to do is we're not voting on anything at this point, but I would like to go through these items just to see where working group committee members are at on these. So after we get through these, we can take a brief recess and maybe see where we're at, if we can get some of these things passed. Okay, so I'm going to start out with, and the procedure here would simply be to have members of the Senate and the House get their thoughts on these issues out. These should be somewhat non-controversial. Not all of them, some are controversial, but like appurtenances, that's pretty controversial. And so we will go through each of these items. So income and corporate franchise, Senate Article 1, House Article 1, Governor's Language, House Section 10 and 11, Short Line Railroad Credit Certification. Is there any one of the members that has issues with that? Okay, I don't see any. Let's go to the next one. If we could, House Sections 6 and 12, Chorus Debt Subtraction. Any issues from Senate members or House members on that issue? In fact, I really like that provision myself, but okay. SEIU Minnesota stipend payment subtraction. Make sure we all have the documents here. You okay?
Yes.
Okay. Any concern or questions about SEIU Minnesota stipend payment subtraction? If there are questions, we will then go to House Research or Senate Research and just kind of get a brief summary so we kind of know where we're at. So that one doesn't seem to be a problem there. Okay, House Section 1, beginning farmer priority allocations. Chair Rest, and then Senator Putnam after Chair Rest.
We need more time to think about that, and with hoping to at some point put it together with other beginning farmer provisions or agricultural provisions that were in our bill, and particularly the beginning farmer issues, and still waiting for a report of the conversation that I asked Representative Joy and Senator Putnam to have, which I understand they were not able to get to yesterday. So we're passing on that one right now.
Very good. Senator Putnam?
What she said, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the House DFL would expect there to be representation in that conversation from the House DFL Ag Chair if we're going to move forward on ag provisions in the tax bill.
Senator Rest. Thank you, Chair Gomez. Senator Rest.
Mr. Chairman, I meant to include that as well because Representative Gomez had asked about and even in the general conversation that representatives not only from these members on the tax working group, but to confer with members on the Ag Committee and certainly with the Senate Council also that advises the Ag Committee as well as the Tax Committee.
Thanks, Sarah Rest and Chair Gomez. I totally agree on that. We should have that representation. Okay, so of the four, it looks like we're pretty good on three. We've got some work to do on House Section 1, beginning farmer priority allocations. Property, Senate Article 2, House Article 3, Senate Sections 2, 13, and 14. Attachments and appurtenances. Any issues with that? Okay. Item next, Senate Sections 3 and 5, tribal-owned property tax exemptions for Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe and Grand Portage Band. New language from Lax Band of Ojibwe. House Section 20, Red Lake Nation College exemption. Comments on that? Chair Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We still have objections to Red Lake Nation College exemption. I had indicated yesterday the change on the complicated building on the third one here, that removing the square footage, but inserting parking, and I believe that was acceptable to the city and the, on that one, the city and the tribe. So, but we still have the objection on House Section 20.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Any other comments on Senate Sections 3 and 5? Okay, we will pass on that one. And members, my goal here is to actually pass some things today, because when I'm asked, how's the progress on the working group for taxes? I just say, well, you can eliminate the word progress. And I think we need to have some progress here as we move along. Okay, item next, Senate Section 15, confessions of judgment interest rate changes for homesteaded properties. Comments on that one? And I'm opening this up to the department also, if the department would have any comments, so. Okay, I'm gonna put a okay by that one. Now, this one is cool. Senate Section 16, tax levy for free music in third-class cities. Does anybody here know when that started?
When it started?
Yes,
You mean the effective date?
yes,
I mean.
or the year.
Well, no, I don't know what year it started. What they're asking for is a special permission for increasing the levy from what it is.
That started in 1923.
There you go.
And I hope we can pass it, because that would be a good venue to get Jefferson Starship here, so. Okay, so I don't hear any concerns about that one. Item next, Senate Section 26, fiscal disparities property tax statement. Comments on that one? Senator Hulshoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a simple fix based on a provision that we passed last year in the minerals article. It's just going back to the way it was in 2023 and previously.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments on that? So I'm going to put an okay by that one. Property tax aids, Senate Article 4, House Article 4. Senate Section 5, township aid modifications. Senator Hulshoff.
This would simply allow the allocation to township aid to fully be dispersed. Right now, there's just a little bit left over because of the way the formula works, so this just fixes that so it all gets distributed, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Anyone else to comment on that one? Okay, item next, Senate Section 12, Public Safety Public Safety Aid Report. Any comments on that? Okay. Senate Section 15, all aid penalty forgiveness provisions, cities of Stewart, Alpha, Odin, and Trusky. Questions on that? Item next, LG base aid for City of Boulder. That's basically, I looked at the map, it's not quite a full township. It is basically a township that is incorporated as a city, and it's on Highway 169 between Princeton and Zimmerman. Any questions about that? So basically, we're getting them in the LGA form. They are actually a town now, not a township. Questions on that? If I'm saying that wrong, please let me know. Okay, so those two look good. We're gonna skip the TIF provisions. Let's go to the back page. And again, we're
Mr.
working
Chairman.
off House Offer 2, May 22nd, 2025. And the
Chairman.
updated spreadsheets are 5/22, 3:35 PM, just so we're on the same, Senator Rest.
Just want to note that we're skipping the TIF article because we've adopted it.
Correct. Yeah. See, we're making progress.
Beg pardon?
We're making progress.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we are. Okay, item next. House Sections 1 to 7 and 9, Tax Expenditure Review Commission Turk changes. I think there's going to be some comments probably on that. Thoughts?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the
Senator
other day,
Rest.
I had an objection to the tax chairs having to make a report about every tax expenditure in a bill, and I still have that objection, so I'm not willing to move on that.
Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, part of the reason why we decided to go with a report from the tax chairs is really to help make the legislative budget office's task a lot simpler. Instead, right now, they kind of need to go through our committee hearings to understand what the objective of any tax expenditure is, or they have to go through old papers. Ideally, it'd be nice if we could just, at the end of each session, just put that together. Doesn't have to be very fancy, just so that way it takes one less step off their plate, something that we can do since as the legislative authors should be able to know that pretty easily right offhand.
Any other comments about, thank you, Representative Agbaje. Any other comments on House Section 1 to 7 and 9? Okay, thank you. So that's hold for right now. Okay, House Section 14, Provider Tax Research Credit Rate. Senator Rest.
Thank you. I think I indicated yesterday, too, when I had offered that motion yesterday evening, that I'm not, House research or a member, I need to have more information about what that really is. I mean, I'm not familiar with it, so need more explanation.
I think we can maybe
And I
do
don't
that
think
right
it was,
now.
and it's not in our bill, as far as I know.
Right,
Is that
right.
correct? So
let's get an
that's-
explanation from House Research.
That's another reason why we're backing off of some of these provisions.
Mr. Clayman.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rest, so that was a provision that was proposed in the governor's bill, one of the governor's bill, either last year or the year before. And it's a change that doesn't, and Ms. Templin can correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't have a fiscal impact. Essentially, for background, under the provider tax, which is a collection of, four other taxes, certain taxpayers can take a tax credit for conducting or funding certain kinds of research in the healthcare area. And there's a formula that determines how much the credit, how much the total annual allocation of the credit is. And there are some variable rate decreases that can occur with that. So the credit percentage in statute is 2.5%, but there's also what I would call like a soft ceiling on the total allocation amount of $2.5 million. And so the statute requires that the rate has to be adjusted downward in 0.5% increments to get as close to $2.5 million as possible. But the rate can't go below 0.5%. So my understanding of the rationale for this provision in the governor's bill was that because of the amount of research that has been going on over the years, that credit rate has not exceeded 0.5% for many years. So the proposal in the House bill is to just eliminate the provision that requires the rate to be reduced to get as close to 2.5 million as possible, because it's been at 0.5% for many years. So the House proposal would just essentially hard code the 0.5% rate for that particular credit into statute and eliminate the provisions that require it to be reduced.
Senator Rest?
Mr. Chairman, this Section 14 was in the governor's tax bill. Is that what you're saying? So where did it occur?
Mr.
Was it
Clayman?
in, or who is the author of this on the House side?
Let's
We
go
don't-
to
we don't
Commissioner
have it.
Marquardt, or
Or,
Chair Gomez.
thank you.
Mr. Chair, I was the author of this year. It was we reheard our 2024 bill. It was in the House's 2024 offer. It was in the governor's bill in 2024.
But Chair Gomez, it was not in the governor's bill this year.
Sure.
Okay. Senator Rest?
So, Commissioner Marquardt, why not?
Commissioner Marquardt, why
I
not?
mean, you know. Did he change his mind, or?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, I do not know the answer to that. I remember that came up the other night, and as Mr. Clayman explained it, I remember last year, I could remember that, and I didn't remember it this year, and I thought it couldn't be in the bill this year. So as Chair Gomez said, it was not in the governor's bill this year. I do not know why it was not.
So, Mr.
But I don't know if MMB or others might have more, and I guess not, so I don't know.
MMB, why not? Senator Rest? Thank you, Commissioner Marquardt.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Rest?
I would like I don't doubt at all that Representative Gomez was going back to what we had last year, but there should be a better answer to why it's here, why was not in the governor's bill, than just why not. I mean, somebody's got to be able to say, answer that question. I mean, it could be as simple as, well, we meant to and it didn't happen. There's got to be an answer from the governor's staff on that, if not the Department of Revenue.
Thoughts, Chair Gomez, or should we move on, or? Oh, Chair Gomez?
I mean, I can only say that I included it in my 2024 bill because it was in the governor's bill. We heard it in tax committee this year. I included it as a provision in our bill together because it seemed, as Mr. Clayman described, it's just hard wiring in what is going on right now, and so it seemed kind of like a technical provision, and why not do it? But that's only my perspective.
Okay, thank you, Chair Gomez, and I'm glad that we're going through these items and getting some of the stuff on the table, some of this stuff explained by research, nonpartisan. Okay, one of my favorites, House Section 15. I shouldn't say that because then you'll use it against me and leverage it for something else.
They're all your favorites. All your babies are.
Yeah, a lot of them, yeah. Okay, pharmacy refund timing. There's so few independent pharmacies out there yet, but this is one that they were really pushing. Who from maybe House or Senate research could explain what we're, Mr. Clayman? Why do they like this so much?
Mr. Chair and members, so what this provision does is it changes the timing of when a pharmacy that has paid the Legend Drugs tax under the provider tax, which is passed on to the pharmacies. The timing on when that pharmacy can apply for and receive a refund under current law, they have to do that when they file their return after the conclusion of their tax year. And so what this provision does is it allows those refunds to be paid on a semi-quarterly basis. So the first quarterly refund would actually be paid 6 months later. So it would be paid with the second quarter refund, but the 3 time periods would all be quarterly, with the first time period being on a 6-month basis. And so that would allow those pharmacies to receive a refund faster than they would under current law. And Mr. Chair, members, this would be for sales by those pharmacies of Legend drugs that are out of state, which is why they would qualify for the refund.
Okay, questions, Senator Rest?
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe it was in, that provision was in our bill, our first bill that went to the floor, but not in the one that we have before us. So the reason why is that it was asking about that. And the answer is, it was a mistake. So we have no objection to that.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Rest. House Section 25, extension of availability of grant to Minneapolis. Discussion on this issue, questions, Senator Rest?
Well, Mr. Chairman, in our bill at this point, we have a cancellation of that provision. So it's just contrary to give an extension to a grant that in our bill we cancel. However, we are still really open to reversing that, but we need to know from the leaders if we can use June accelerated. So we would look to be able to remove that provision from our bill, but we need to know that we're going to have some resources in order to cover it. And then at that time, we can talk about the position of what's the rationale and whatever and so on, and get information about extending it. So the goal for us is to find ways to cover that, whatever it is, $9.8 million or something like that. But we need to do that first, but we need to have some opportunities and revenue to do that, and we're just not quite there yet. We have a couple of ideas on how to meet that need, but we need a more definitive answer from the leaders before we can get there.
Thank you. Chair Gomez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we first brought this provision up on Tuesday.
Yep.
We were told at that time we'll have to discuss it later. It is now Friday, or I guess it was Wednesday that I brought it up. It's now Friday. When we put off everything until tomorrow, there's going to come a day very soon that tomorrow will not come. I would suggest that we should have the substantive conversations. If you wish to meet in public, we should talk about the substantive issues and the differences between our bill. This is one of the issues that's different between our two bills. I would suggest that at Friday at 12:30, saying we're adding this to the list of things we're going to do tomorrow is not wise. And I would like to just actually talk about the item.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, Senator Rest?
I just indicated that we're looking for the revenue to accommodate the provision, the actual amount of the grant that's available, and we will get there. But I need to know, and I have one source that I can go to right now, that I need to talk with the Senate side and looking for a way of accommodating that. We don't really need to talk about the provision at this time. I'm willing to get there. I just need to find the money. And that's a priority of ours, to find the money.
And I really appreciate that, and we do need to find that out sooner or later. That is a provision that I do support also, but we're going to have to, on a lot of these issues, we're going to have to figure out where the money is to provide for it, other than if it's in the bill and provided for already. Senator Rest?
Exactly that. I'm not, my hesitancy about it first, and why it got into our bill, is because until May 9th, we were not aware, until we found out from MMB, that any money had been spent, or the invoices put in, or the invoices paid. And so that was, just as in other bills where, that are before us, not the tax bill, other working groups, where there were issues of grants being made, none of them being, or them not being used, and then being canceled to bring into the general fund to address issues in their bills. And so since that time, we understand that the invoices from February, they were paid on May 9th, and that there's 1.2 million or so invoices that have been submitted. Now, I might have the dates a little bit wrong, that MMB is now going over. I was also from Senator Dibble presented with or given a report on where those dollars are going. And so we're at the point of trying to find the money to put back in the bill that will have no impact on this going forward. At that point, it is, and it's in, I believe, the jobs bill. They did grant the extension for 2 years, and probably we would agree to that as well without any particular problem. But I can't agree to since it's not in our bill at this point, I can't agree to the extension until we can fix the money. And those things can go together, but I don't have the money right now. So I'm working on it. I don't know how more positive I can be toward this provision that we intend to, in our bill, to get rid of it.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Senator Representative Gomez.
I would
Chair
just note that this was in the original Senate bill that was passed, I guess, out of taxes, 2 rules back to taxes, and then I believe out of taxes again in the Senate. And at that time, there was no reason from a fiscal perspective to try to be making up the target using this, because there were a number of revenue raisers in that Senate bill, including the great social media tax that Chair Rest and I are authors of in the 2 bodies. There was an increase in the net investment income tax, and there was a big June accelerated. And so there has been ample time to discuss this item substantively since that bill passed, and I would like us to do it today, but I guess we're going to shoot for tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you. And just Senator Rest.
Aren't we going to find out whether we get to use EIS or not?
We are going to make some inquiries to say when
I've
I'm
been
sorry.
pestering them, so I think that means a big deal that could be a quick deal. I don't think
They
we
might
have to
need
wait till
more
tomorrow.
pests.
Why would
And
we wait until tomorrow?
Senator Rest, they may need more pests, and I'm a pretty good pest. That being said, I think that's very encouraging. Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you just said using EIS. Can you explain what that means?
Beg pardon?
You just said,
I didn't mean EIS, I'm reading a text. June accelerated.
Okay,
So-
thank you. I was confused. I appreciate it. Thanks, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
no problem.
Okay, now, as far as tomorrow, it's,
One puppet.
of course, I won't have the gavel, but it's my intention not to meet this weekend. We all have very important events.
Yes.
So the first thing will be early
need
Tuesday.
to
So
finish.
I don't know if our
As much
friends
as we
in
can.
leadership are going to be coming down, swooping, taking it. I don't know that. When? I mean, is it this afternoon? Is it this evening? When is it? You know, but I think we continue today to, hopefully when we come back from a recess, actually pass some of this stuff. And then it'd be my intention when we go into recess, that if maybe both sides could get offers on more substantive issues that are in the spreadsheet. And I think it's going to come where we have a situation where if we just can't agree on something, we just have to drop it and move forward and center rest.
Well, the reason why we need the answer is because right now, you have provisions in, at least in the spreadsheet that uses, not EIS, but uses June accelerated, that currently you're not allowed to do because they haven't agreed to let us. And we don't have any, and we would move things around if we knew that, but we can't know that. I mean, we can't do it unless we know that.
You are correct,
So-
and
So.
they need to get back
So when
to
they
us on
talk
that.
about us moving along, well, goodness gracious, and I would actually say something stronger, what have they been doing? You know, it's a yes or no, and they should tell us.
Totally agree, and I really appreciate when you delivered that note signed by the working group folks to the governor. I appreciate that. So what I'd like to do here, it's Chair Gomez. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We're getting there.
Okay, if there's one more item on here,
Oh, thank you, Chair Gomez, thank you.
And then after this, I'd like to say something.
Certainly. Okay, Senate Section 12, this is one of my favorites here. I shouldn't say that. Agricultural Society debt limit increase. Basically what they're doing is they're allowing a bonding capacity up. There are many needs at the state fair for their buildings. This does not affect, some people are concerned, does this affect our bond issues for the state bonding bill? It does not. So comments on Senate Section 12. Okay, let's see here. Oh, one thing that we should be talking about, doesn't have to be now, but yet this afternoon, is, or it could be now, sections 15 to 17 and 26. And again, we're not voting on this, I'd just like a discussion. The R&D credit refundability. As we were in the meeting yesterday, the governor's office, the House Republicans, the Senate, DFL, and I think Republicans. Is Senator Weber for the refundability?
Yes.
Okay,
And
okay.
he, I believe, right, there he is, on the screen there. And just as an aside, yesterday I had indicated that Senator Klein would be added to the working group due to the absence of Senator Dibble, but the person who's actually coming now is Senator Clark. So just-
Senator Clark?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so any thoughts on the R&D? Because I think we're good on the data centers up to the point of removing electricity from the data centers exemption. We still will have to figure out what we do on the back end on that. And I think cannabis was fine. So, yes, Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a comment on, just before we move on from this, the House offer for May 22nd, 2025. It was the House DFL's understanding that this was a package offer. After, I'm not going to relitigate what happened last night, right before we adjourned, but I'll just suffice it to say that I noticed what happened, and I am even more inclined to view this offer as a package deal after last night. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Senator Rest.
The process that we had used when we had an offer, we would have also wanted that to be a package offer, but instead of that, we allowed the House to delete any provision that they were not comfortable with, and I would have expected the same courtesy from them on this. And if we do have a motion now, the Senate will be voting no.
Thank you, Senator Rest. And as far as a package deal, it makes it kind of tough when we don't know if we can use June accelerated yet, but so what I'd like to do is move things forward, keep the discussion going. And so what we'll do, if it's okay with members, is I'd like to get together with the House DFL and senators can get together. And I'd say let's dig into the spreadsheets more and come back with some ideas of things we might be able to agree on. Because, and like I said, at this late hour, if there's some things that just aren't going to work, then we have to face that and hopefully we can move forward. Because we've got a lot of good things that we can move forward on this. And I'm thinking that, and I could be just totally wrong, but I'm thinking that on some of the bigger items, we're gonna need some help. We're gonna need some help from leadership. But I'd like to put a bill, I'd like to be able to say to leadership, we're moving forward. But when we're not passing anything, which, and I agree at this point, we're not going to be passing anything right now. But I think we need to start passing some items here and get this bill put together and get it moved forward. And then when they swoop down from their ivory towers and take the bill, hopefully they can see that we've done some work on things we do agree with that could be included by the tribunal. So that's my goal. So we will go into recess till about, let's say 1:45, and if either side needs more than that, we will certainly just come through me, and if we need to delay it a little bit, we can. But I'd really like to make some progress on taking the spreadsheet apart. What are some good things? Well, they're all good, of course, on both sides, but what are some things that we could move forward on? And assuming that we get our June accelerated, because that's gonna block us on a lot of things if we, don't have that answer. But I'd like to move forward as if we got the green light on June accelerated. So, Senator Rest.
So, Mr. Chairman, the issues that we see that are not otherwise also not resolved are the article on helium, the PGA sales tax exemption, the AARP bill that came from Senate File 447. We have differences on SFIA. We would like resolution on SAF, on the ballpark, on the local sales tax reform, the ag issues. Still waiting for a conversation report on a recommendation to us, particularly the beginning farmer issues and policies that Senator Putnam reported on yesterday, the airport property tax exemption, the grazing provision still in the dealing with the ag issues, conservation easements, the homestead resorts, the school aid proposal that is Senator Housechild's, disabled veterans, which I think actually is the same, the issues dealing with border cities, the market farming, and floriculture. So those are the things that we would be looking at. And I hope when you say do the spreadsheet that you can also point to the language in your bill, and we have to do the same in ours. Thank you.
Absolutely, Senator Rest. So I think we're close. I think.
Separate us.
Yeah, Senator Rest, could you explain the AARP issue? I'm not familiar.
Thank you. That, one that was brought that allows and provides for restitution to victims of being defrauded, where there, that has been adjudicated, convictions have been there. However, the fraud is there, but the person has absconded, let's say, moved out of the country, can't find them, there's no money available. On the other hand, the situation exists where the fraud has been convicted, found and convicted, and there is opportunity to recover, but not the ability to direct it to individual victims because you can't find them. And so that money currently goes into the general fund. And what this proposal did that came from the AARP, and of course, they're not the only people who are defrauded, every age and every pocket of everywhere. But older folks tend to have more in savings and access to retirement funds, and more so than younger people. And it's the kind of fraud where somebody, calls you from Florida. In fact, this was an instance, and claims to be your nephew, and you've just been arrested, and you need to make bail, and can you send me some money? And the victim says, well, you don't sound like yourself. And you'll say, well, I've got a cold. And then that goes on, and the phone call is turned over to a person pretending to be an attorney, that they need a retainer before they can do anything for this person, and will you wire, $10,000? And of course, it's a scam. And at some points, not to make it all that more complicated, but there is a conviction, but the money is not recoverable. But from that other side that I mentioned, those dollars go into the general fund. The AARP, when the bill was being developed, also agreed and suggested that there be a limit on that for, in any given year, of no more than $1 million available to the victims. As the bill also was being developed, there were concerns about the Attorney General's office being transparent, making reports, and following the trail of money, and worked with Senator Coran on that, who is very particular about things like that. And so there were reporting requirements put in. The Attorney General's office has raised objections to some of those, but they had a chance to do that earlier and they did not. So the bill is in there without that, any changes in the reporting. There is no impact on the general fund here because it's money that would go into the general fund and then carved out. In the House, the bill got stopped along the way because of the I don't know if the word skepticism is correct, but a certain, and I don't like using the word concerns because it's meaningless, objections to what was perceived as a lack of transparency without more more teeth in the reporting requirements. So that's long story with, but that's why it ends up being in this bill. And I was the author of the bill.
Thank you, Senator Rist. Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, we understand that issue. We just, when you refer to it as the AARP item, I think of it as the consumer enforcement compensation subtraction. That's how it's noted on the spreadsheet. So Representative Lee was the author of that provision in the House. And so, as you noted, there are differences between, there was the addition of this Koran language, which the House can't support. I'm just saying, if I could just.
Yeah, sure. go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I would just ask for Representative Lee, as the person who's the author in the House, we're happy to, accept this provision, but we just would need some language changes, it sounds
Sure.
like, so
Yep.
that could happen.
Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. Okay, with that, we will go into, we have our marching orders to get some things that we can agree on here. If we don't agree on them, let's discuss them. Let's keep moving here. We will go into recess until 2 p.m. We are in recess. We will call the House Senate Working Group back to order. And what my goal is here today is I really believe we need to be talking about more things that are in the bill. We're not taking any votes on these. We're not concerned, well, I'm very concerned, but we're not concerned about June accelerated, because when we put this puzzle together, we will have to take various items and make them fit in. I'm hoping, and I have contacted someone in our leadership to make a decision on June accelerated, and I have not heard from my leadership yet. So you should all have, members and staff should have a list of 25 items that I'd like to just visit about. Just what are these issues? What is it? I don't even want to talk about cost, because that's something we'll have to fit in down the road here. So, and then I'd like to know maybe from research staff, Senate, House, if they're in both bills or not, because I don't really know. So let's go to number one, a disabled market value veteran exclusion. I know we have that one. Does the Senate have that issue? Mr. De Silva?
Mr. Chair, members, yes, and the language is identical to what is carried in the House.
Identical. Wow, that's cool. Okay, so who would have any questions or like to make comments on this issue here? Chair Gomez.
Thank you very much, Chair Davids. So, the thing that I would say about this is that these are kind of like popular things to do that shift property taxes onto other property taxpayers. And so this is a difficult one. Obviously, we both have it in our bills because people who don't have to think about tax policy implications of things look at this and they say, this is for, people who have sacrificed for our country and came out of the experience disabled. And so it's right that we should make sure that they're not, pushed out of their homes that they own because of property taxes, or, that it doesn't present an undue burden to them. The only challenge with it is, and it doesn't cost the state anything. In fact, it saves us quite a bit of money because there are interactions with the property tax refund, which makes it sort of an even more appealing thing for us at the state level to do. But what we are doing is, and we have to, just be prudent and thoughtful about this, is we're shifting those parts of local property tax levies onto other property taxpayers. And in some places, there are a lot of disabled veterans who don't own their homes. Fully or partially disabled veterans who live in rental housing. And of course, people living in rental housing don't directly pay the property tax, their own property taxes. Their landlords pay it. but this doesn't help them at all. And so I just, I feel like I have to, on, the basis of just the policy, the tax policy implications of this, I have to bring up that issue. Mr. Chair, when we presented our bill together, one of the things that we were complimented on, and one of the things that I thought was actually really good about our bill, is that we did not do a lot of property tax shifts. Because, doing property tax shifts, again, is something that is appealing to us as state policymakers because we don't have to pay the bill. And it's like a lot of little moves, and it's like, oh, this one only shifts, a couple $1 million worth of market value. Oh, this one shifts $20 million worth of market value. But in the aggregate over time, those shifts really do impact property taxpayers. And so I just wanted to bring that up on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Other comments on item 1? Let's go to item 2. Item 2 is, there's two different things. Browerville is actually a grant to help out with the school that collapsed, or the gymnasium and so forth. And they made a very compelling case in the House. And then Woodbury is to put some funds into clean water, I believe. Clean water. PFAS, yeah. So Woodbury was Representative Chaw, Browerville was Representative Wiener. And so maybe I look at staff here. Are they in both bills? Are they similar? Are they in one bill, not the other? Chair Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had originally had any number of local government sales tax exemptions, and we had a gazillion of them, and we ended up, because of the cuts we had to make, taking those, not picking favorites, but if we did, it certainly would be these two. And the Woodbury, in terms of clean water, is the sales tax exemption on the construction of their water tower, okay, to deal with the PFAS. The Browerville one is because of the terrific storm that destroyed that school, and which is very different from a decision from local governments to say, well, this building is too old and we just want a new one. They were faced with a disaster. So I think that those two have been in, I think, both our bills off and on for the last couple of years, just to, there are other interesting projects. The Woodbury one was a bit more expensive. And when I say expensive, I mean the exemption was higher, much higher, and over more than 1 year. I think the Browerville one is just over 1 year, just as additional information without any value statements.
Thank you, Chair Rest. And I'm a big fan of sales tax exclusions, always have been. There's a lot of history there. But we were hearing many of them, and I was thinking, how are we going to be able to afford these? And when we added them up, I believe that now staff can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had over 60 requests at over $200 million.
Indeed, we did.
So that, we just ended up with these two, basically.
And Mr. Chairman?
Oh, wow, more than 200 million.
Yeah.
Chair Rest.
Mr. Chairman, the local governments, of course, are exempt from the sales tax. But as we know, the difficulty is that they work with the contractor. The contractor goes and buys the materials. And the reason why we have a refund system is to make sure that the sales tax exemption only applies to those materials that this local government is actually paying for. And if they paid for them up front, they would get the sales tax exemption. But almost everyone uses a contractor. And the commissioner knows, I tried a couple of ways of how could the state participate in any meaningful way to allow that to be an upfront exemption, so that we wouldn't be getting 60, 70 requests for something that they're actually owed. And that is consideration of the getting back the money that they paid on sales tax, or that their contractors paid on sales tax, that we could come up with some sort of formula, and tried a couple of different ways, and each time got the answer back from the department, that won't work. So still open to trying for that, maybe not this session, but over the interim, seeing if there's a way that would be possible, even if it's kind of like a backup support thing, or a sharing, to start with, a sharing of whatever that sales tax would be, that they would get some sort of upfront exemption, and then if it was more than what it was, that we could do some kind of formula to reimburse them, but it could have been done directly, but just couldn't come up with anything that was meaningful and doable. But these sales tax refunds, it's not because they owe the sales tax, they don't. It's because we don't want contractors buying extra materials and getting the benefit of sales tax when they don't use those materials and they return them to the lumber yard. And at that point, they eat that exemption. So we haven't come up with a particularly good way or effective way, or a way that does not incentivize cheating, that, but I don't know, I don't have any solution yet. But it is, since they've already paid it, it is a burden on those local governments.
Thank you, Chair Rest. Anything else on item 2? Item 3, data center provisions. As you know, that was one from leadership. We are cutting the sales tax exemption for data centers on electricity. The question seems to be extending the sunset on that. So let's open that up for some thoughts. We've done the first part, or we will do the first part. It's what do we do on the back end? Thoughts or questions? Okay. Oh, Chair Gomez.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I just want to say in general on this that the proposal, I talked about some of the problems with the new language that popped up in the latest version of the bill. I understand maybe that's been changed again. It's sort of a little bit of a moving target to try to figure out. The way that I would urge us to think about this, so I requested an updated revenue estimate. So if you went back and you looked at the tax expenditure budget, the estimate for how much the data center sales tax exemption was going to cost per year, it was like somewhere around $108 million. When this started, for those who don't know, the estimate was more around $5 million a year, and so now it's 108. I got an updated estimate. The 2029, that updated estimate showed that the actual value would be $212 million, or was it $219 million? So just so people have an idea of the scale of the acceleration of the cost of this sales tax exemption. I think it's really important that we're aware of that. So that's been the trend on this. And you know, leadership made an agreement about repealing the electricity component of the sales tax exemption, which I think was prudent given our budgetary challenges and the trajectory of the growth of this. Even if you take off the electricity, we're still talking about $171 million a year in 2029. So that's sort of the furthest out that we have an estimate for right now. The rate of, you know, of kind of the escalation of the construction of data centers is something that, you know, do Google search. You'll see here in Minnesota and elsewhere, the capacity, the megawatt hours of these are projected to expand kind of in a way that's hard to think about even. You know, like times 10 what we have today. And what we have today is $171 million a year. So just do the math. I mean, it's hard to even say that out loud. Like, could it possibly be $1.7 billion a year if all of this capacity comes online? We've seen other places in Virginia right now, their data center exemption costs them $750 million a year. So this is right now. So when we talk about extending a sunset in 2042, you know, whether we're extending it to 2062 or extending it to 2102, it's something of an abstraction, right? Like I said, most of us except Chair Davids are going to be dead by then. He's still going to be here.
Let's do it right here.
He's going to be right here. He'll see you here then. But, you know, we really have to think, and there, you know, as soon as that electricity that component of the exemption got removed, there was an incredible, I'm tempted to, it's probably inappropriate, so I won't ask the people who are here on the dime of the data centers to raise their hands, but there's a lot of them. We've all been hearing from them. And so we have to be really honest about what's in front of us. You know, this is a sales tax exemption that is being asked for by the largest, most profitable corporations that have ever existed on the face of the earth. Those corporations are operated by the richest men, literally, who have ever walked the face of the earth, two of whom own more wealth than the bottom 50% of us. And it just goes up and up and up every year and every month. And so what we're talking about here is sending hundreds of millions of dollars of your kids and your grandkids, and if they have their way, your great-grandkids' money, public dollars, tax dollars, to the largest corporations that have ever existed on the face of the earth. At a time when we're facing down a $6 billion deficit in the tails, at a time when we are potentially facing devastating cuts to safety net programs like Medicaid from the federal government. And we're here talking right now about extending billions of dollars of public tax money, not even that we're going to have to account for, but that the people who are sitting in these seats in 20 and 40 and 60 years are going to have to account for. So, you know, we kind of like talk about sunsets. They're sort of an abstraction. The year 2042, who knows what's going to be going on? But I think it's really important that we actually look at what this really is. And we look at the powers that are lining up to try to force us to make this decision. And we think long and hard, not just about making corporate interests happy, not just about economic competitiveness, but about what we're obligating ourselves to as the public here, and whether it's appropriate that this kind of money should be going from the public coffers into the hands of billionaires. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, Chair Gomez. I have a little different look on this. Yes, there's expenditures, but I would sure like to see some numbers on how much the state gains because we're doing this. It's billions and billions of dollars. When I first wrote this bill, some years ago, we projected $5 million. I guess I was a little off on that. But what that means is this has been one of the most successful programs in the history of the state of Minnesota. And I'm going to be digging into some numbers, you know, how many billions of dollars are coming out so we can pay for homelessness aid, for other items in the state budget. I mean, we learned yesterday that Amazon is suspending or pulling back from Becker. I'm hoping we can do some things here so that they decide to come back. And as far as the sunset, I'd like, you know, you said 2042, I think it was something like that. I think it was a song in 1969 from Zager and Evans, in the year 2525. That's how far I'd like to go on this, because these are winners. We make billions and billions of dollars on these things. There's somebody from fiscal could probably be a little more accurate than that. But these are a good thing. The trades have been so wonderful in what they do to build these things and to keep them going. It's not just about building them, but we also want to keep them going. And a tremendous amount of union jobs, high-paying jobs for a lot of people. So yes, there's cost, but if you look at how much is coming back, we do very, very well on data centers. Any other comments? I was a little off when I first did these, and it was 5 million. Just a little bit off, yeah. Senator Hochschild.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Gomez, as well. I mean, I concur quite a bit with Representative Davids, but I'm also under no illusion to what Representative Gomez is talking about, that we are referring to some of the richest companies in the country and the world, maybe in our history. But this provision is a performance-based sales tax exemption. We are getting investments from these companies to Minnesota. Minnesota is not an island, folks. We are connected to other states that have other exemptions that will build these data centers. So we have to understand, do we want investments in Minnesota or do we not want investments in Minnesota? And when we look at that, we are talking about union jobs, high-paying union jobs in the building and construction trades. One of these data centers could be the equivalent of US Bank Stadium. Where is US Bank Stadium built? Minneapolis. I want some of the US Bank Stadium dollars to be built in greater Minnesota. I want some of those investments and those jobs in some of my areas, right? That's what we're talking about here. In addition, we have climate goals in Minnesota that's attractive to these companies. I mean, there's a reason I think they want to invest in Minnesota, not only for our literal climate, but because we have climate goals. Those are things that are attractive, that make Minnesota a place that could benefit from these investments. Not only that, but if these data centers are built in a place like Becker, that is tens of millions of dollars to local schools, to local communities, tens of millions of dollars that we don't have to come back to the state to ask for aids to pay for. That's the benefit of these investments. Yes, there's a state sales tax exemption, but local governments getting tens of millions of dollars in self-sustaining tax revenue, that's incredible. That could be life-saving for some of these communities that are losing population. I'm one of the co-authors of the social media tax bill. I am under no illusion that we should be taxing some of the wealthiest corporations in our country. I wish we could pair social media taxation on bad behavior by social media companies with good investments and incentives for them to build and choose Minnesota. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. We should incentivize investment in Minnesota and tax bad behavior. That would be the way that I would do this so that we benefit most in Minnesota. Mr. Chair, lastly, I would leave you with, who around this table doesn't use YouTube? Who around this table doesn't use Gmail? Who around this table doesn't use Facebook? Come on. We all use it. Let's make sure the investments are here. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't use Facebook. Gmail. Chair Gomez. Oh, and then you, okay.
Wrong table to ask that around, I guess, Senator Housechild. I want just one very small thing, because the benefits of local governments made me think of this, and this was one of the most extraordinary things that I've maybe read during my time here. Is there was this article in the Star Tribune written by Walker Orenstein about a tract data center that was proposed for Farmington, Minnesota. And I read with great interest one small detail from that article, and it was that there was an elected official, I don't recall if it was a mayor or a city council member, who was asking their economic development director for some information about the project, because there's a lot of just, local interest about it. And the elected official, there to represent the interests of the people, was told by the economic development director that they had signed a non-disclosure agreement with the company, and so therefore that employee of the city was unable to discuss the details of their discussions with this corporation. And I have major issues with that from so many perspectives, from the perspective. Because what we're talking about when we talk about the ways that these giant corporations operate is we are talking about corporate power in our democracy. We are talking about the power of the people, a government of, by, and for the people being hijacked by corporations. And this was one of the most chilling local examples of that I saw this year. And so I just wanted to share that detail with people, because I'm deeply concerned about the governing bodies of cities and counties not having the ability to properly represent their residents when they're in these situations with these giant corporations. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to add a little bit of more to this debate. I guess the question, a lot of people keep throwing numbers back and forth, but one set of numbers that I'm always interested in when people are like, this will create lots of jobs, or this will create, millions of dollars back to our local communities. And I just want to get a better understanding of where that's actually coming from. I think most of the time we actually hear that from the corporations who are looking to receive a benefit from this. So let's, try to keep that in mind as we are reading the press releases and reading the reports that are coming from many of these wealthy corporations themselves. Again, I also think the cost on the environment is also something that we should continue to be aware of. This drains a lot of power through the electricity system. It also drains a lot of water power. It also just can create additional pollutants. And so I think we just need to better understand that situation. And then finally, the potential jobs that may come, it's not always an either or proposition. I think we need to make sure that the jobs that are coming are actually going to be sustainable jobs, to be good jobs for people. I don't think we necessarily really know that yet from the data centers. I don't think that data has borne out. And so I think we should just go into this, if we do go into this with eyes wide open, and making sure that whatever tax exemptions we are giving to these corporations are actually worth it in the long run. So far, the numbers I've seen, I'm not entirely sure that they're completely worth it, but, open to those conversations. But I just wanted to at least put that out there to let folks know that it's more than just, a center and the building and the potential jobs, but actually what the future impact will be on all of our communities and the state of Minnesota.
Thank you, Representative Agbaje. Okay, anything else in data centers? Okay, let's go to 4. Now, this one I really know nothing about, so I'm interested to hear what this provision in the Senate bill is or does. So who would like to take item 4? Helium, the Helium article. Senator Housechild.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wondering, do you want me to sort of broadly go over it, or would you prefer that nonpartisan help us? I'm happy to talk about it generally.
Well, maybe we should start with partisan, then you can fill in. Is that okay?
That's fine with me. Is that okay, Eric?
Mr. De Silva or
Okay.
who? Mr. De Silva.
Mr. Chair, members, the Helium article in the Senate provides a mechanism to tax the production of gas. It does so by imposing a gross proceeds tax. So helium, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen products would have a gross proceeds tax rate of 7% for the first 3 years of mining and 9% in the years following.
Excuse me, Mr. De Silva, what article are you on to,
I believe it's Article 9 of the Senate bill, Mr. Chair.
sorry to interrupt there, Article 9? Thank you, please proceed.
The gross proceeds tax distributions would be distributed as follows. It would be 10% to the IRRB if it's within the tech assistance area, 45% to counties, school districts, cities and towns located within a helium relief area, and 45% to the helium property tax relief account. Within the article also is the definition of a helium relief area, which is the area that is comprised of a school district located within 17 miles from a mine that produces the gas product. This article also contemplates adding to the occupation tax the production of gas. The occupation tax distributions would be 25% to counties located within the helium relief area and 25% to tribes located in the helium relief area. There is also the establishment of a helium property tax credit, and it would be for homestead properties located within a helium relief area, and it would be $50 per credit for each qualifying homestead. I would now refer to Ms. Pollock to talk about some of the changes that are contemplated for sales and use tax, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Pollock? Chair Gomez?
Yeah, thank you. So, just trying to keep up because we didn't hear this in the House, and so it's kind of complex. So I'm trying to follow. So I heard you talk about the distribution from the occupation tax, but then before that, you were talking about a different distribution. That's that 10% goes to the IRRB, 45% to towns, counties, et cetera, within an area, 45% to helium property tax account. So what tax was that one?
Sure,
Mr. De Silva?
Mr. Chair and Representative Gomez. So for purposes of the gross proceeds tax, so the first tax is the 7% for the first 3 years of mining and 9%, and that tax is distributed the 10% and then the 45. The last distribution I was referring to was the we're adding this product to the occupation tax. We're not changing the rate, we're adding to the occupation tax itself and specifying that the distribution of the gas for purposes of the occupation tax only are distributed such that it would go to counties located within the helium relief area and then to tribes located within the helium relief area.
Chair Gomez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. So can you just remind me, so it's a gross proceeds tax, and then one of them is sort of in lieu of property tax, and one is sort of in lieu of the corporate franchise tax. Can you remind me which one is which?
Mr. De Silva?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez. So the gross proceeds tax would kind of be the severance tax would be in lieu of the property tax. The occupation tax is in lieu of the corporate franchise tax and is paid by all sort of mining industries, and what's happening in this article is just bringing into that tax the production of gas products.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And so, Mr. Sylvia, so because the occupation tax, the one that's in lieu of the corporate franchise tax, isn't there like, I just remember somebody told me there's a constitutional dedication of that one that's 10% to the University of Minnesota and I think 40% to the K-12 education. And I didn't hear that in your description. I'm wondering where that fits in and if it comes off the top or how that works.
Mr. Silva?
Sure, Mr. Chair and Representative Gomez, right, so there is that constitutional dedication, and you're correct, it's 10% to the University of Minnesota and 40% to the secondary schools. So when I'm talking about the distribution to counties and tribes within this article, it's sort of that 50% that remains in the general fund. So it's sort of like half of the half. So we're not certainly modifying any distribution to the schools. It's just the remaining distribution that sort of stays in the general fund. Half of that half sort of goes to the tribes and half to the counties.
Chair Gomez.
Thank you, that's very helpful. So the 10% constitutional dedication from the occupation tax that goes to the University of Minnesota, is that for a particular purpose? Or is it just sort of like, is it to a particular part of the system? Is it to the system overall? Is there any guidance that we give related to that? Or is it just kind of like money to the U?
Mr. Silva.
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, to my knowledge, there's no specific purpose by which the statute or the Constitution, which is kind of, there's a secondary statute that repeats that allocation, and there's nothing in that statute that sort of dictates how the university must spend that revenue generated from that portion.
Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks. I didn't mean to interrupt. That's very helpful. Thank you.
And Mr. Sylvia, I apologize to you. I was pronouncing your name incorrectly, and I just absolutely hate it when they do that to me. So I apologize, because they'll say, how do you spell Greg? 1 G or 2? So I say 2. So what do? G-R-E-G-G. That's 3, right? So I apologize to you, so. Okay, Senator Hochschild.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for bearing with us while we explain sort of the complexity of this. You know, this provision is very similar to what we do for taconite taxes. In essence, what we're saying is, in lieu of local property taxes, we are instead using a severance or a gross proceeds tax to collect dollars to be used locally. In addition to that, as Representative Gomez mentioned, we do have the occupation tax, which is constitutionally dedicated, and then the remainder, which for the first time ever for a mineral extraction, we are making a provision in there to share with our tribal sovereign nations. The reason why that's under occupation tax is because that was really the way, in working with DOR and with Council's office, that we could figure out how to sort of properly distribute those funds, in my opinion, adequately to the tribal nations, because they didn't fit within the distance of at least, as of right now, the initial discovery wells. And so trying to take into consideration that tribal nations were here before us, that they do have tribal sovereign, lands, and then also making sure that, some of those proceeds from the corporate tax go that way. So, Mr. Chair, happy to continue talking about it. Oh, the only last thing I would say is, this is based off of where wells are discovered and producing. So while the taconite relief area or taconite assistance area is an existing stagnant area, this is this could hypothetically be a growing area depending on where gas is discovered in the state. And that is why you heard the provision in there about 10% off the top going to the IRRB if the well is in the taconite assistance area. If it is not, as gas is perhaps discovered as we move southwest geographically through Minnesota, which is what the experts are sort of saying could hypothetically happen, then it would, new relief areas would come up and those distributions would exist in those areas. I hope that's understandable from a broad
Senator
sense.
Hochschild, is this currently being extracted, or where are we on the process?
Yep, only in the discovery phase, Mr. Chair. So right now there is discovery drilling happening. There are 2 jet streams near Babbitt in St. Louis County and Lake County. Excuse me, no, I think they're only in Lake County, forgive me. But there is ongoing discovery, and there's anticipation that gas could be found elsewhere.
See, I always try to get in the IRRB, being from Fillmore County. Back in the 40s and 50s, we had iron mines, Hannah Mines. We actually had iron mines. And my good friend, Rukavina, God rest his soul, would never let me in. He'd never let me in. Questions on helium, the helium article. Chair Gomez.
Yeah, okay, so does this apply to other things besides helium?
Yes, this would
Senator
apply.
Hochschild.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Gomez. This would apply to helium, hydrogen, or CO2.
Chair Gomez.
And so, I've never been on a environmental committee. This is like one of the pitfalls of taxes, is like, there's all this stuff we know nothing about, but we have to kind of try to get our arms around it, so I'm sorry. But, you said there's like a discovery kind of phase, but are there like other things that will have to happen in like, you know, regulatory sort of spaces before the gas is like being taken out of the ground, or however it is that you talked about it?
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, yes. So as of right now, we are in a rulemaking process
Okay.
that the agencies are going through in order to properly regulate gas in Minnesota. Unbeknownst to a lot of us, we've been doing taconite mining for 100+ years. We have never had any gas regulatory framework in Minnesota. So this is a first ever framework that we are putting together. So that is ongoing as we speak. There is a moratorium on production of gas until that rulemaking process is complete.
Chair Gomez?
Do you have any idea like of the timeline on it?
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, I think I'd rather get back to you. I think it's 2026, but I'd have to find the exact date.
Chair Gomez?
Thank you. And so you're saying, you were talking about like, the taconite assistance area is like sort of a defined area, but that any like helium assistance area would be within 17 miles? Like, is it like a 17-mile circle from a place where there's a mine? Is that how it works?
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, the idea here is, and I mean, I don't want to speak about our forebears and how they created the taconite assistance area, but from what I gather, that was also a little bit of a dynamic process legislatively in creating that taconite assistance area as mines were discovered and that sort of thing. So that's sort of what we're setting up here. If a well is drilled and producing helium, let's say helium, they would draw a 17-mile square radius. That square radius would pick up school districts. Those school districts, the entirety of those school districts would then become the helium relief area. That relief area would then designate where those gross proceeds go.
Chair Gomez?
When you say that relief area would determine where those proceeds go, are we setting up like an endless number of little IRRBs across the state, or what does that mean?
It would be a,
Senator Hochschild?
sorry, Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, it would be a dynamic process on an annual basis to determine where all the helium relief area is.
Chair Gomez?
But then you said they would determine within the helium relief area where the money would go. Who's the they within the helium relief area?
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, I think you're asking who would determine where the helium relief area is?
No.
Oh, what?
What you
Chair
said,
Gomez.
and I don't, what I heard you say, maybe I misunderstood, was that you said, then, you know, that this is, that the helium relief area is 17-mile circle radius around where there's a mine. And then you said, and they would decide within that helium relief area where it would go.
Oh, yeah.
And so my
Senator
understand.
Hochschild? Oh, I'm sorry, Chair
Sorry,
Gomez.
just my understanding of, is that there's a, you know, there's this board that makes those decisions within that, the taconite assistance area. And so I'm wondering what that means by they'll decide with, because what if, you know, you're saying it's gonna move southwest, so there's gonna be a number of helium relief areas across the state. So, yeah, I'm just curious about that part.
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, I may have misspoke. What I meant was, once the helium relief area is determined on an annual basis, the disbursement via the waterfall will occur through the Department of Revenue to those helium relief areas. So there is no board deciding where money goes or who gets what. It would just go through the formula, through the waterfall. Now, the 10% that goes to the IRRB, if it's found in the taconite assistance area, would go to the agency, thus working through the commissioner to determine where those dollars go within the taconite assistance area.
Chair Gomez?
Thank you. Okay, so it's just that there's this waterfall for that's the 40, you know, 10% to the IRRB, for example, the 45% to, I don't know what that says. And then there's a helium property tax account. So that would just automatically happen. But then there would be like a helium property tax account for many different areas around the state, not just, because there's just the one taconite property tax account right now. So we're talking about setting up a number of these accounts, I guess.
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, I might ask council to just
Okay.
make sure to clarify that.
Mr. Sylvia?
Mr. Chair and Representative Gomez, so within the article, it does establish a helium property tax account. And that would receive the distribution through the waterfall that Senator Hoshaw mentioned to pay for the Helium homestead credit. I will note that within the language of the Helium homestead credit itself, there is the requirement that the Department of Revenue certify that there is sufficient, amount within the account to pay for the properties that are eligible. And in any year, if there's, insufficient funds, then the credit would not be paid. But it would just be one account and one property tax credit, and it would just be for those properties, eligible homestead properties located within a helium relief area.
Chair Gomez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How do you move helium or another gas around?
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, it's one of the hardest minerals to sort of contain. It disperses very rapidly and very quickly. There is, you can truck it and get it to a processing facility, but it's difficult, to say the least. It doesn't stay contained very easily.
Chair Gomez?
So
Is there-
gas tanks.
Gas tanks. Is there a helium processing plant in Minnesota?
Senator Hochschild?
No. So-
Mr. Chair, there's not, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So where would you have to take it to?
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, there is, ongoing discussions about what that could look like from the company's perspective. I'm certainly not an expert or involved in that, but hypothetically, they could construct a processing plant nearby. They could also, there's been some talk of smaller processing happening on site that would help them transport at longer distances, so.
Chair Gomez?
I mean, I have like 500 questions about this. Obviously, I don't know what it means to process helium. I don't know what it means to, honestly, I don't know what it means for the surrounding communities and for the landscape to take helium out of the earth. I have visited taconite mines, and so I know that that's a process where there's, you sort of blow up the earth, and there's a process that happens where they pull the taconite out of the soil. It's a very, it's a very energy-heavy industry. It's a lot of trucks. There's a lot of impact, like very localized impact of taconite mining from what I understand. And, so like the infrastructure up there, part of the taconite industry is moving very heavy trucks across the local roads. So there's, and then of course, because you have a situation where a lot of times it's like the company that extracts taconite, or in this case, maybe extracts helium, will sort of exist as a subsidiary of a subsidiary of a subsidiary that ceases to exist once the activities, once a mine, the resources in a mine have been depleted, then that entity ceases to exist. And so that's sort of part of the reason for doing an in lieu of the corporate tax. But, I don't understand enough about the gas mining process to understand what the local impacts are. And so then what because to me, that's a justification for keeping a lot of that revenue right there. And of course, the general fund even gives extra money into the IRRB, into that taconite assistance area each year. And, there are those just very localized impacts that I think that taxation structure that exists for taconite is designed to respond to. And so I need to understand if it's the same kind of situation with extraction of gas in terms of the local impacts, and if those local impacts then justify the creation of, a similar structure to the kind of taxation scheme that exists for taconite. So to me, it's like, this is obviously, a lot of times there obviously are other complex policy conversations about this, I assume happening in other areas of our state government right now that I'm not aware of. You talked about the rulemaking process. In taxes, a lot of times, we end up with like kind of a little piece of a much bigger conversation that's happening, and so we have to try to contextualize our piece. In this case, what we have in front of us is a very complex taxation structure for this industry. And so for me, it's like, like I said, we just haven't discussed this, and so I feel like, given our timeline, I need a lot more time with this just to understand the issues. And it sounds like we have a couple of years based on the rulemaking process. So that's just sort of my thinking about it right now, because I probably have been talking about this for too long already, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. But, you know, it's a very complex issue, and so I just think it really does deserve a more fulsome conversation. Thank you.
Senator Hochschild.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Gomez. I know we have a lot more to get to. I would just assure Representative Gomez that you know, this process, while it is extractive in right now, northern Minnesota, potentially other parts of the state, you know, it's not nearly what you would see with, you know, taconite, right? But there is still definitely a process that goes into it in our land up in northern Minnesota. And, you know, happy to continue this conversation. Certainly I would and do support implementing this tax framework so that we're ready and prepared for this industry. And it's something that I'll be pushing. So we'll continue the conversation.
Chair Gomez. Representative Baji.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe Senator Hochschild, you mentioned that Minnesota has not had a gas portion on the or tax section, and that you're adding it to it here. So I guess my question is, as you were putting that framework together, could you just talk about kind of maybe what other states or other groups that you talked to in order to understand the framework that you decided to put together? I'd be interested in knowing, particularly if it's based on a different state, what state that was.
Senator Hochschild.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Egbaje. We, last legislative session, passed a Helium rulemaking process that is, as I mentioned to Representative Gomez, ongoing. As part of that rulemaking, it created the Gas Technical Advisory Committee made up of agency staff from all the different agencies that touch, hypothetically, a new gas industry. That group worked with national consultants, groups that have done gas frameworks in other states like Colorado and others, to work with us to put together both a rulemaking and regulatory framework, but also a tax framework. So really, I've been working with experts who have done this in other states, as you have described, through the agency's support.
Representative Baji.
Thank you, that's helpful. I think it'd be good to know, you mentioned Colorado. I think that'd be helpful for us to kind of understand that research a little bit more, and this, you know, kind of maybe doing a little contrast and compare with some of the states as you have done already, but that might help us with the tax framework here to better understand maybe what has worked really well in some states that are comparable to Minnesota and what hasn't as much. So thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Baji. Any other questions or comments? I want to thank Senator Hochschild and Mr. Sylvia. This is something that I knew nothing about. I think I know a little bit more, but I'm very interested to learn even more. This could really be something here. Item 5, agricultural items. Maybe I'll go to Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can just sort of reiterate some of the things that I said yesterday, because I think that
Certainly.
they deserve another hearing. And that's that I think we have essentially 5 premier provisions here that are agricultural related. So I would include number 6 within number 5, with your permission, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely,
Because
yes.
the grazing provisions are clearly agricultural concerns. And you can put them in a couple different buckets. I think that 2 of those provisions have to do with what counts as a family. And as I said yesterday, I think it behooves us to have as inclusive and as connected to reality a definition of what a family is as we can possibly imagine. And that means, I think, that we need to realize that some families are bigger than the nuclear family. Some families get pretty large. And allowing a larger family to be, that's doing agriculture, to be considered a larger family, I think that that's important. And secondly, the definition of family members. Another provision has to do with whether or not a stepchild is really a member of your family, if you're a farmer, according to tax practices, or a nephew or a niece. I think that those 2 provisions in particular aren't just common sense and non-controversial and free, which is also pretty important. They're just sort of basic. And I would encourage us to just sort of take them on their face, not get them involved in politics or any kind of machinations along that regard, and just say, yeah, that makes sense, because it does. The other provision about grazing, which I didn't get a chance to talk about yesterday, is also a very basic win-win-win, where you have a nonprofit with land and you have a rancher nearby, and the rancher wants to graze those cattle, perhaps, on this nonprofit land without the nonprofit sacrificing its nonprofit or tax exemption space. It's good for the nonprofit. It's good for the land, because grazing is good for the land in and of itself. It's good for the rancher. I also kind of think it's probably pretty cool for the cow. I think the cow kind of likes it too. So these grazing provisions seem very straightforward to me as well. The other two, perhaps more complicated issues in the agricultural field right now are the market farming and the beginning farmer tax credit. Now, as I mentioned yesterday as well, the House did accept the provision about floriculture, but without engaging the question of acres. That is a meaningless change. If you are growing flowers in the state of Minnesota, it's likely that you're operating with 2-3 acres at the most. And if you don't, to include floriculture without engaging with the acreage question, you end up actually opening the door to a massive corporation, because floriculture is actually super labor intensive. And so the only one that this would actually, the only sort of operations this would impact would be a giant corporation that was farming flowers, and we don't have those here either. So I would encourage us to think about this alternative path to respect a small farmer. We've got people with 5 acres, 3-4 acres throughout the state, and right now we're telling them they're not real farmers. We're saying they're just gardeners, which I think is an affront in a number of different ways. So I do hope that we can genuinely engage the question of the acreage as well and provide an alternative path for folks who are beginning farmers, specialty crop producers, immigrant farmers, those folks to actually be treated as farmers as well. And the last provision is the beginning farmer tax credit, which I think both bodies support in a certain extent. But if we don't expand the resource, it will continue to not do the good that it can do. And it's also, although it's not free, it's not entirely all that expensive given the ratio to the good that it does. I think that's something that we need to do a little bit more in politics, is articulate the cost of something to the good that it would accomplish. Price tag itself doesn't matter so much as the good that it will do. And I think an expansion of the beginning farmer tax credit will do tremendous good in getting more people into farming, alleviating some of the tremendous anxiety around questions of succession. There are ways that we can tweak the beginning farmer tax credit to make it a little bit cheaper even, and I'm open to those conversations. But without expanding the resource itself, we will not be doing the good that we can do. So, Mr. Chair, that's my take on the agricultural provisions.
Thank you so much, Senator Putnam. Questions from members?
Mr. Chair?
Chair Gomez? Oh, let's go Senator Weber.
I think he's raising now.
Thank you, Chair Davids. One of the things I wanted to mention was when I chaired the Ag Policy Committee, I also served on the MALC Committee, which is the Minnesota Agricultural Leaders Cooperative.
Education Leadership Council.
Education Leaders Cooperative, thank you. And they are in charge of our adult ag finance management program. And one of the biggest problems that faces Minnesota farm families is actually being able to transfer the farm to the next generation. With the land costs that we've seen, we see a great strain on the younger generation trying to be able to afford the land. We see a great tax strain on the the older generation. And also, one of the examples that I had was in my district, there were 2 brothers that farmed together. And when the one brother had children that were involved in the operation, the other brother did not. Well, when the brother that did not have children in the operation retired and moved to town, he lost any claim for homestead credit on ag homestead credit on his property, and it makes a substantial difference for him, and it affects the amount of rent he has to charge his nephews or nieces in relationship to what they could pay. And then also we see in the farm, even in smaller farm families, a trend to going towards a corporate ownership of their property, because as they look at the transfer, it's much easier to sell a few shares to a family member or to the next generation than it is to sell a number of acres. And so as a result, as this changes, I think that our real estate tax laws need to change along with it. And as you can see by the spreadsheet, there's a minimal, if any, cost to this at the end of the day. And also, and many times with the grazing permits and change, if that is not allowed, then quite frankly, many of those acres will not be grazed and will not be available to the ranchers and the livestock people to graze. And so those are the comments I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Weber. I like your background there. I saw a little house back there. I was wondering if that was a little house on the prairie or?
No, just a ripe soybean field.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, any other comments on these provisions? Thank you, Senator Putnam. Thank you, Senator Weber. Okay, item next. Oh, I'm sorry, Chair Gomez, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, we just heard that these are no-cost items. Again, I'm going to just sort of repeat myself on these property tax shifts. They are of cost to other local governments. Even though there's no general fund cost to property tax shifts, there are costs to them. We just don't have to account for them. We don't have to bear them, which makes them appealing, provisions for us to advance. Just a couple of specific things on a couple of the items. As you may have noticed, we are not in agreement about how to raise money in our bill. So I think we were happy to, when we had a bunch of money, we did a bunch of beginning farmer stuff. And we're happy to do that, but we're kind of in a different situation right now. I will say that the House DFL really supports the small acreage farm provision. Chair Herr carried that in the House. I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of deal in those smaller farmers. If we really do want to support local small-scale agriculture, we know about all of the many benefits of small-scale farms to the landscape, to the health of the soil and water, and to those communities. But we weren't able to come to terms on that one, and we weren't able to come to terms on a couple of the other ones, which is why we came in with sort of a small position, even when we were able to. I understand the point about the floriculture kind of not working without the other components, but what we had was like 3 provisions. Davids didn't like one, Gomez didn't like one. We were both like, oh, floriculture is cool with us, but then it doesn't work, so that's not much help to anybody. So, but just some of the dynamics there. The last thing that I wanted to say was that, I understand that this grazing thing is not a huge deal, but when we were talking about the tribal property tax exemptions, institutions of pure public charity, 501c3 status organizations engage in activities that support their charitable mission and other activities that generate money. And so if an activity of a 501c3 is generating revenue, then that is generally not considered a tax exempt activity. And so that's the challenge with expanding that tax exempt status that institution has to non-tax exempt activities. And in taxes, you make a little decision like that, it can just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and kind of go places that you may not anticipate. And so that's my concern about that one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Putnam and then rest. Senator Putnam.
Mr. Chairman, I would
Senator
just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just point out that all the agriculture items, including the grazing one, were enthusiastically embraced by Democrats and Republicans alike across the political spectrum, and we're very pleased that we got such praise for them of the work that Senator Rasmussen, Senator Anderson, certainly Senator Putnam, Senator Weber, such that praise came from both the big agricultural groups, the Farmers Union and the Farm Bureau, and also from the Commissioner of Agriculture. We're very proud that the Senate article recognizes the need for celebrating the modern agricultural economy. Thank you.
Senator Putnam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chair Gomez, for your discussion of these provisions. I totally appreciate it, and I think you make a lot of sense. And I'm also glad that you are at least seem to be in support of the market farming provision, because it's really, really important. This is basically coming from my pal Kelsey, who has 5 acres in North Branch. And right now, she doesn't get a benefit that a 2,000-acre soy farmer does, and I don't think that's okay. So I'm really hoping that we can take care of that pretty quickly. I understand some of our fiscal constraints, totally do. I think there are things we can do with the beginning farmer tax credit to still make it affordable and reasonable. And again, we don't really know the full cost of it, given that we're taking the cap off, but it still shouldn't be all that significant. But without putting more resources into it, it's not going to do the good that it can do. And on the question of the conservation grazing, which apparently Senator Weber is doing right now, oh, he's back on, good. Thank you, Senator Weber. I needed you for the visual aid for the joke, so I appreciate it. But one of the things that I think policy can do, and something that we ought to often aspire to, is to make decisions and to think about issues that bring people together. And in this situation, we have the Nature Conservancy and the cattlemen working together, which I think is a pretty cool thing. I did not have that on my bingo card. And the result of this is going to be, I do have a concern argumentatively with the notion that making this one change necessarily will lead to other changes. That's not automatic. That's sort of skipping a causal link that I think would be necessary. But I understand the risk and the concern on that issue. So, but I do still think that these are incredibly important provisions that do good in lots of different ways. So again, thank you very much for the conversation. Oh, I'm sorry if I may,
Yes,
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Putnam.
I did actually reach out to Representative Joy and Representative Hansen, and I've got crickets so far, so I don't have anything to add.
Representative Joy, I think, is at his twin son's graduation, I believe. And I don't know why he's not here. He really should be here. Senator Clark.
Thank you, Chair Davids. And Chair Gomez, this is one of the few agriculture provisions that I received constituents from Northeast Minneapolis saying this would be great. I have one flower farmer in Northeast Minneapolis. So I think from Leroy to Blackhammer to Northeast Minneapolis, this is going to be a spot that actually helps in this.
Senator, what did you say, from Leroy to Blackhammer?
I said Leroy to Blackhammer.
That's my district.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, okay.
Chair Davids, I have a picture of you and me from my 6th grade tour of this Capitol.
Where'd you grow up?
And he was only 74 when that happened.
And probably your parents, too.
No, I'm an Eagle.
Dovriota.
There you go.
Oh, you were the mayor.
No.
You ran for, no, I mean of Iota.
Well, you're getting closer. That's my brother.
Oh, that's your brother.
Oh.
You know, when it comes to agriculture, I've always wondered how you can have a black cow eating green grass and it has white milk and yellow butter. Have you ever pondered that? I've always wondered about that, but, okay, this is getting out of control. So that's cool, yeah.
Yeah, so my Chair Davids, my other brother, he is almost in your district. He is in Elmira Township.
Elmira.
And he's got 80 acres there.
Didn't the Oak Ridge Boys have a song about that?
I'm pretty sure they did. And I'll follow your lead.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you. Nice.
Chair Davids, we've met. And you.
Nice to meet you again.
Good to see you.
Oh, wonderful. Like old home week here. Okay. Any other questions on 5 or 6? Okay, let's go to 7. Who would like to, from research, like to talk about, or Senator Rest?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, there was a provision brought to us by Senator Dibble, and so I would ask council just to explain it, and of course, he's not here to advocate for it, but we can explain it.
Mr. Sylvia.
Mr. Chair and members, under current law, assessors are not allowed to reduce the value of property that is subject to a conservation easement unless that conservation easement or restriction is for water quality or quantity control. Conservation easements restrictions entered into prior to May 23rd of 2013, or easements in a county that has adopted a referendum to protect farmland that is specific to Dakota County. What Senate Article 2, Section 6 is doing is adding another mechanism by which the value of property can be reduced if it's subject to a conservation easement, by specifying that the county assessor can reduce that value if the conservation easement is in a metropolitan county that has adopted a program to protect farmland or natural areas.
Thank you, sir. Questions on item 7? Okay, we'll move on to 8, Homestead Resorts. Who would like to handle that one? Senator Hochschild?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in Minnesota, we have a tiered system for valuing resorts, similar to what we have for some other properties. However, those have not been updated since 2003. As you can imagine, with inflation, COVID, and some of the valuation massive hikes that we have seen across the state and country, we haven't had them adjusted since 2008. I misspoke. This has had a profound impact on some of our small mom and pop resorts. And we have actually had a decrease in resorts in Minnesota by about 200 over the last several years. And so what we're doing is, in this provision, is making it so that the tiered valuations for those homestead resorts is the same as what we did for agriculture in the 2023 tax bill.
Okay, thank you. Questions on number 8? Chair Gomez.
Thank you. So can you just say the different tiers, the new levels that you're proposing for the market value for the 3 tiers, please?
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, I may ask council just to help with that.
Council?
Mr. Chair and Representative Gomez, so Class 1C Homes Resorts, there are 3 different tier levels. And I'll just say at the outset, the first tier is valued at 0.5%, the second at 1%, and the third at 1.25%. And any value within that third tier is also subject to the state general levy. Under current law, the first 600,000 is in that first tier, and the proposal here is so that it would be the first 1.5 million. Under current law, it's the value of 600,000 to 2.3 million is tier 2, and this proposal would be that 1.5 for first tier to 4.5 million within the second tier, and then under current law, any value over 2.3 million is that third tier, and this proposal would say that any value over that second tier of 4.5 million would be in the third tier and subject to a higher class rate of 1.25 and also the state general levy.
Chair Gomez?
Okay, so first tier is currently at 600,000. Under the proposal, it would be at 1.5 million. Is that true?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, that's correct, yes.
Chair Gomez?
Okay, and then the second one is not 4.5, but that's what I wrote down. But 4.5 is what the third one is at.
Mr. Sylvia?
So, Mr. Chair and Representative Gomez, the way the statute is written, it's not like other classification rates. It says sort of the next, and it has a number, but the impact would be in our proposal. So the first tier would be up to 1.5. The second tier would be 1.5 to 4.5. And then the third tier would be anything over 4.5. It's just the way the statute is written. It's not sort of easy breaks. It uses sort of the phrasing of the next, in this case, 1,700, but it really is that value between 1,500 and 4.5, if that's helpful.
Chair Gomez?
Yeah, that's very helpful. I did not notice that because I'm looking in this book and usually those tiers are like breaks.
Yes.
But they're not because it says next. Okay.
Chair Gomez?
Okay, thank you. So, I guess, again, I just want to say this, this is a shift. It's a really big change, and we didn't include it for those reasons. It has, I think that there is, just some conversation that needs to have about giving, this is a very preferential, tax treatment. 0.5% is, not the absolute lowest, classification rate in our entire property tax system, but, it's number 2 after 0.25 for the first tier of 4D low-income rental housing. So it's a really sweet, a very, it's a generous classification rate. And so, I just feel like, again, we got to look out for shifts. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, let's move on to something much less controversial, Hennepin County Ballpark tax. Who would like to, maybe if we could have some council talk about
Yes,
that, or Chair
Mr.
Rest?
Chairman, I'm going to ask Ms. Pollack just to give the facts of the proposal that's reflected in our Article 10. I prefer not to get into details about ongoing conversations, and so I will not have any kind of editorial comment about that following the presentation of it.
Certainly, so we could stick to what's in the Senate bill. Ms. Powell.
Mr. Chair and members, the Senate's proposal would be to extend the 0.15% Hennepin County ballpark tax to continue to make payments, capital improvement grants towards the Twin Stadium, and continue to fund library hours and, I'm sorry, what was the other item?
Youth sports.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Senator Rest, youth sports and extending library hours. But it would also authorize a new use of the tax revenues, which would be to fund county hospitals, nonprofit county hospitals located in Hennepin County. It would also provide a grant of $5 million annually for homeless prevention services. And I think I hit the big points, Senator Rest.
Chair Rest.
Yes.
Okay, any other comments?
I asked for the description of it, and I prefer not to make editorial comments because there are ongoing conversations that I don't want to mess up by interpreting what those are at this point.
Representative Gbaji?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just add that the House has a different bill that has language in some places similar to the Senate's language, but in other places not. And so hopefully that can be a place to hopefully kickstart conversations. I know that they have been stalled for a while, and so I think just to better understand that if folks look at the bill that the House put in and then I think the bill that the Senate has, you can kind of see where the differences are between each of the three entities and kind of how the tax should be delineated and how the usage should be delineated. And so I would just suggest people look at that. And to the extent that there are ongoing conversations, hopefully it'd be something that we could resolve. If it's not, I do think that, we have plenty of time to look at it in the interim.
Any other comments on number 9? Okay, thank you, Representative Gbaji. Let's go to number 10, school aid.
Mr. Chairman,
Chair Rest.
we were going to have an absolutely complete article of nothing, and we were calling it the house child article because he has so many bills in this bill.
I thought we already talked to that, Chair Rest, on number 4. He should be named, that'd be a good one to be named after. Okay, school aid, Senator Hultjob.
Mr. Chair, yes, I do love taxes, to say the least. You know, we've talked about this provision. I'm happy to talk about it again. It sounds like that's the direction we want to go, so I'll describe sort of what we're doing here. So in 2000 and 2001, two different administrations and the legislature made a decision to pull seasonal recreation property taxes from local school operating levies. Initially, it was pulled to the state to be distributed through a fund for education. Then the next year, it was pulled and put into the general fund to make up for some budget gaps. I'm generalizing here, but that's essentially what happened. So that was a real disservice to school districts and regions that have a lot of seasonal recreation property. For example, some of the school districts in my district, as well as school districts in Representative Joy and others' districts, we have as much as 50% of the properties that are seasonal recreation properties. Many of these seasonal recreation properties, if not the vast majority, are far above the valuations of the average home in those counties and regions. And what this does is it makes it so that the highest wealth properties, oftentimes second homes, third homes, out of state people owning homes in Minnesota, are not paying local property taxes to the school districts at which they have a property. For me, this is a huge equity issue. It means that many of our school districts that are surrounded by some of the most beautiful places in Minnesota where the wealthy get to come and recreate and enjoy are not helping pay for our kids' future. And so understanding that there is a sort of tax structure discussion that could also be had, which, you know, perhaps I'm interested in. Instead, we are sort of coming up with another way of getting back those dollars. So right now, those seasonal recreation property taxes are paid to the general fund. What we are saying is for those school districts that have more than 15% of their properties as seasonal recreation property would qualify for this new seasonal rec aid. That aid would then pay up to 50% of the local operating levy for those properties as an aid back to those properties. I know that Representative Gomez has mentioned, why don't we just tax those residents? Well, in essence, we already are. We're just sending it to the general fund, and we're saying, let's send those dollars back via this aid to the local school districts that, again, ultimately pass an operating levy. So we still have to ask the residents to pass a school operating levy to help fund our schools. This would just then provide that aid up to 50% of that seasonal recreation property. This is really, really critical because many of the school districts in these areas are losing students, they're losing teachers, they're cutting programs, and it's creating a system of inequity in our public school system. And so this is, I think, a very reasonable way, rather than maybe looking at something like equalization, which is $100+ million. Let's get at sort of the heart of the issue for some of our school districts, use far less money, incentivize local school districts to pass operating levies, and incentivize them with an aid back to the state, paid for by the very residents who own those properties that they already sent to the general fund. So, Mr. Chair, this is something I'm very passionate about, obviously. I think it would do a huge service to our students and to our future in Minnesota and make sure that the wealthiest pay their fair share for our schools. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to talk more about it.
Thank you very much, Senator. Other comments on item 10? Okay, let's go to the next one, item 11, research and development credit. And of course, that's one that it wasn't a suggestion, I guess we were told to have that in the bill. And it's about $80 million over the next several years. But the question is it a refundable credit or just how are we going to do this? Any thoughts on 11? And we have had some discussion on this. Yeah, and I would just make the comments that this is something that will be done. And I think that we'll have to see, but I certainly support the refundability on it, but that's still in discussions. So, Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, I think that we were told by leadership to come up with a way to enhance the R&D credit by $20 million a year over the budget window And we were not told exactly how to get there. I understand that, the rest, probably everybody but me, supports refundability from what I understand from our conversations. And so I just want to put a couple of cautions out there about establishing a refundability in the R&D credit. So this is an uncapped corporate tax credit. The cost of it is, I believe, around $150 million a year, so $300 million a biennium. So over our budget forecast and the way we've been talking about it, $600 million. 67% of these credits, these are old numbers because I'm quoting an OLA study from several years ago, but 2/3 of it goes to C corporations, 3/4 of that goes to the very, very largest C corporations in the world. Most of them are headquartered in Minnesota. But, because you have to have, do research and development activities related to this. And so this is an existing, very, very generous corporate credit. And when you are talking about refundability, what you're saying is like, we're not only going to allow people to use this tax credit, or entities, corporations in this case, to use this uncapped tax credit to buy down their tax liability. If the value of the credit exceeds their tax liability, then we will cut that company a check out of the public coffers and send it to them. And this is a highly unusual design for a corporate tax credit. And it is, from a tax policy perspective, I believe a bad design for a corporate tax credit. Usually, the refundable tax credits that exist in our system are for the poor, mostly. We're talking about the working family credit, which is our state version of the earned income tax credit, and our nation-leading child tax credit. Those are the major refundable tax credits in our system. And, we know that very, very low-income families, a lot of times, don't have a lot of tax liability, especially if they have children. And so that's why we, kind of make this exception for those tax credits that go to low-income families. Because we know that, and in that case, we're sort of talking about getting, a couple hundred extra dollars in the pockets of a family that's struggling to make ends meet. And so that's a very impactful couple $100 that we use as the result of those refundable credits. But I don't believe that the same justification for putting in place refundability on a tax credit exists when we're talking about very, very profitable corporations. So that's my caution on the refundability aspect of the R&D credit. It's an unorthodox design choice for a corporate tax credit, and it's very, very generous. And, in a moment, again, where we're staring down a $6 billion deficit in the tails, and we're making painful cuts to education and human services, what we are doing is taking a $300 million biennial cost for this corporate tax credit, and we're increasing it by $80 million. Or by $40 million per biennium, and that was our direction. But I just want to mention, last thing is that this credit used to be fully refundable for a couple of years, and it grew in a way that was unsustainable and was unexpected, and so the refundability was taken away. And I am interested to see. The projection is that there would be no growth in this credit as a result of the refundability. And I'm curious as to whether that is true or not. And so, I just have some concerns about that from just a tax policy perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. Just on this issue, I believe Minnesota, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Minnesota was the first state to come out with the R&D tax credit some years ago. And it's been very, very successful. I mean, we have companies in our state like 3M, Medtronic, Boston Scientific that have spun off hundreds and hundreds of jobs, thousands of jobs because of the R&D tax credit. And we need to basically, now we're trying to keep up with the other states. They saw what a great idea we had, and they're using it, and I think we need to be in the ballgame. Chair rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as you know, the Senate agrees with your preference for the R&D credit to be refundable, and all of that to be refundable and not bifurcated between the first and second tier and refundability. And so in that, we also support the governor's preference as well, although he did not require it. He left that discussion to be with us. And, you know, some additional history, perhaps. After the R&D credit was adopted, a couple of years later, I'm not exactly sure of the timeline, but the Pew Trust got very interested in some of the tax expenditures in Minnesota, and we had a bill that required the legislative auditor to pick a tax expenditure, a credit, any kind of thing that had a fiscal impact, and conduct a study of it as part of the program evaluation. And that was my bill to do that. And then they did that with the R&D credit and came to me and said, please don't ever do that to us again. A lot of tax policy changes from time to time, and that's happening with the R&D credit, and it was extremely difficult. They tried the best they could, and they made some observations, but their shop is just not set up to make those kinds of studies. And so then the next year, that requirement for them to do that was repealed, and it's not gone back to that since. And the arguments that are made to me about it, certainly, as you were saying, Mr. Chairman, the large corporations and their spinoffs, but what I have seen, and I think the governor has, and I agree on this, that it also is an opportunity for the development of startup companies such as those that are part of the Medical Alley type of organization and structure and whatever to do research on developing new medical products. And the first 7-8 years, it takes at least that long to even get a patent on some of these items. And so during that time, as they are searching for investors, they often are routinely, I should say, experience net operating losses. And by having the R&D credit be refundable, it keeps them afloat. And I will continue to support the refundability of the R&D credit as we have it in the agreement. But it's also a credit that has a varied history, and sometimes in other states, particularly California, it's put in and then taken out, and then you look around the country and see what other states are doing and how you can be competitive with them. So it doesn't end up being a permanent part of a tax code because it has become in other states too responsive to economic realities that are going on in those states. So it is a credit, and the treatment of it is very dynamic. And I think we have responded to that in the past, and maybe going forward, it's going to continue to be a feature. That feature is going to continue to be one that we continue to support because of all of the economic activity that it produces, which of course we want to incentivize small startups, and in particular, that they are all over the state and not just in the metropolitan area, although some of the bigger ones are. So just want to give just a little bit of history on that. Sometimes people refer to that R&D credit study that was done by the OLA as something that is dispositive, and it truly is not, and there also was not enough history in order to really make a thorough evaluation of it. So just that information. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair Rest. Any other comments on 11? Let's go to 12, and I'd like to go to Jared Swanson, Senior Property Tax Deferral, if you could tell us what we're doing there.
Mr. Chair and members, the House position on the senior deferral program is increasing the income limit for qualifying homeowners to participate in the program. The current income limit is $96,000 a year in household income, and this would increase that number to $110,000.
Okay, Mr. Swanson, is that in both bills or just the House bill?
I believe it's just in the House bill, but Mr. Sylvia can correct me if I'm wrong.
Mr. Sylvia?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. It is not in the Senate bill.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. Questions on the senior property tax deferral? Okay, thank you. 13, taxpayer outreach and assistant grants. I think, is that House only? Chair Gomez?
Yeah, thank you. So this is an item that we brought in our bill. So there are sites across the state, across the country actually, volunteer tax assistance sites. Chair Rest used to volunteer at one before she, I don't know if she still volunteered at VitaSite during her time at the legislature, but they prepare taxes in every corner of the state for low-income people who meet the kind of income qualifications. So they're funded by the federal government. And actually, it was when Chair Rest and I went to visit one of these. It was near the White Earth. It was the name of the organization is escaping me. My apologies, but we went together and they told us how much money they got from the federal government, and it was like $25,000 or something, and they were able to serve all these people all across the region with that. But the federal dollars that go to VitaSites are very restrictive in what they can pay for. And so one of the things that we did in our last couple of budgets is that we've provided a little bit of state funding, and we now have base funding for the first time from the state going to these organizations. And the work that they do is just incredibly valuable. They really, take little bits of money and serve a lot of people across the state who otherwise would not perhaps claim refundable credits that they are entitled to. The other thing, there's sort of two components to this. One is supporting volunteer tax preparation across the state. And the other is grants to community-based organizations to talk to folks about some of the changes that we've made, especially in the last couple of years. In our 2023 bill, we made some just pretty monumental changes, especially to tax credits that impact the very lowest income people in our state, and we did that really intentionally. It was the largest tax cut in Minnesota history, the 2023 bill, and and it mostly went to the neediest among us. But we changed the design of the renter's credit to be, from being a freestanding refund to a refundable income tax credit. We established a brand-new child tax credit. We combined it with the working family credit, so certain families who never qualified for the working family credit under the old design now qualified for a child tax credit, and it's very important to get the word out to those families who may not have otherwise had a reason to file, but now they're going to get this benefit for their kids. And so those are the sort of the activities that the taxpayer outreach and assistance grants support. And, you know, it's been a shared priority in the past, and I'm glad we were able to bring a little bit of it into conference in our bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. Questions on item 13? Okay, let's move on to 14. Who would have that on? Sean Williams? Sean, you want to describe it? And is this just in the House bill or both bills?
Chair Davids and members, this is in the House bill only.
Okay.
Item number 14 on the list is the so-called baby bonus child tax credit expansion. That provision is effective for tax year 2028 and fiscal year 2029. It's an increase in the child credit amount by $100 for each qualifying child of the taxpayer that was born during the taxable year.
Okay, comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Williams. Item next, land value taxation districts. I think this is, Mr. Swanson, is this House only?
Mr. Chair, yes, this is only in the House bill.
Okay, what does it do?
Mr. Chair and members, the land value taxation district pilot provision in the House bill would allow the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul to establish for up to 10 years land value taxation districts within the cities. Within these districts, the cities could develop a procedure for reallocating the property taxes due on the parcels within the districts on an alternative tax base. And the alternative tax base could include solely the value of the land of the parcels included in the district, or the value of the land of the parcels in the districts excluding improvements to the value of the land after a certain date. There's also some flexibility to use referendum market value and net tax capacity tax basis for the reallocation of taxes within those districts as well.
And thank you, Mr. Swanson. This one might have a little way to go on some language. There are some concerns from various organizations, but that's, as Mr. Swanson described, that's where we're at on that. Item 16, border city changes.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry. Any questions on 15? Chair Rest, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have looked at this over and over again. It's the work of William George over, well, now 125 years ago. And his promise that if you adopted this, it would be the end of poverty. He not only predicted it, he promised it. And of course, in Pennsylvania, where they have a bifurcated, some cities, I don't believe any other level of government use this approach, has not particularly, they use it, but it is very, very controversial and remains so even in Pennsylvania. At one point, and I regard that as a weak point for me, had looked at it and considered it in one of our conference committees, but I'm not going to go there this time. I think there's lots and lots of evidence about why it is not to be recommended in Minnesota, and it doesn't surprise me that there's lots of interest to make sure that various features are protected, and that we have groups, probably of taxpayer organizations or taxpayers or businesses or whatever, that are raising a lot of questions about it. It's very attractive that you only only tax the land, and then it encourages property hoarding, and, or at least that's one of the claims that is made in terms of criticism of it. And it's got a long way to go before it's even, in my mind, something that we should adopt as a pilot. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Senator Hothschild?
Mr. Chair, I just have a question for maybe Mr. Swanson. So would this, I mean, if we are exempting the properties themselves but not the land, is that what I'm understanding? And would that shift property taxes, or how would that work?
Mr. Swanson?
Mr. Chair and Senator Houschild, so within the districts, the tax due on each parcel within the district would be reallocated on those same parcels using a different tax base than what is currently used under current law, either net tax capacity or referendum market value. So the taxes would be shifted, but only within the district itself. So it wouldn't impact parcels outside of the district. The same amount of tax due on the parcels within each district would be the same amount of tax paid by those parcels. It would just be reallocated among the parcels using an alternative tax base. One of those being the values of the land and not the improvements on the land.
Senator Hothschild? Chair Gomez?
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, I think that probably minds can differ about the results in Pennsylvania. I think that some people have looked at them and have a different impression than Senator Rest, which is fine. You know, this is designed to encourage, well, to encourage development and to discourage speculation. You know, we have a lot of parts of our city where sort of somebody will come in and they'll buy an empty lot and they'll sort of sit on it until they can make a ton of money on it. And in the meantime, sorry. Yeah, we needed that. There was a Post Malone show here a few days ago, so that was appropriate. Basically, it discourages land speculation, which has negative impacts on the property tax base, on surrounding communities, and, you know, can just artificially prevent things from being developed. And so that's the idea here. We've really slimmed it down. It is a pilot project. It would have to be approved by the governing body. It would only be possible in Minneapolis and St. Paul. It would have to be approved by the governing bodies. They would have to establish specific districts where this would happen. It wouldn't be like the whole city. I will say that, you know, Representative Elkins is the chief author of this bill. I know that because I'm copied on all his emails, so I know he's been working hard on this one. And those who know Representative Elkins in the audience are chuckling because maybe some of us have also been copied on his emails. But he's working very diligently on this with those parties that have objections to it. And you know, we kind of hoped that this really slimmed down, targeted pilot version would be possible, and we're still hopeful. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments on 15? Okay, then we'll move on to 16, border city changes. I think this is a house only, I think. Chair Rest.
Mr. Chairman, it's a Senate provision.
Oops.
And it was Senator Kupek's.
Okay.
Regarding, you know, the limitations in the border cities provisions now, current law, on what activities could be supported and so forth, and what, just like we've been doing with the ag stuff, responding to getting rid of some of the out-of-date activities and removing those restrictions on what they could use their resources on. And I don't have that language in front of me, but at the time, before we had to scale back everything, we also had an appropriation in there, but that that was removed, but they asked both Senator Johnson and whose border city from his district and Senator Kupex wanted the restrictions on the activities removed. And it's no cost, but it does reflect, just like with the ag issues, a recognition of modern economic policy for cities that in particular are across a river that is a large, regional center, Moorhead and Bartle, and then Grand Forks and East Grand Forks in the northern area where Senator Johnson's area is. So really just releasing them from restrictions that are out of date.
Thank you. Any other comments on item 16? Thank you, Chair Rest. Let's go to 17.
That's mine too, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me?
That's my provision too.
Chair Rest.
Thank you.
On 17.
Or the border city changes were Kupex, but I mentioned earlier, we have very few, this is one of the only ones, sales tax exemptions. And the criticism, of course, is, well, why in the world would you get into this for a major event or major events, particularly that in a sport or a game like golf. And those activities, those major golf events and tournaments bring in thousands and thousands of dollars of economic activity. And in particular, coming up, the Ryder Cup is coming here. And so that is an international event, not just even one of the four major PGA championships. And it, when the PGA has their, when they're planning where to go and where, because obviously there are hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 golf courses, where should they go to, and under what conditions would they bring that kind of economic activity to an area? And those contracts and those decisions are made 20 years in advance. And Minnesota, and particularly this venue, and I've just lost the name of the golf course, but down in Chaska, that this provision would give them an advantage in attracting major, in making the argument to the PGA to have those tournaments. Maybe again, another Ryder Cup come to Minnesota. So I'm sure on the one hand it looks frivolous, but it is a tremendous opportunity, and it has to be done now. You can't wait until, a year before one of these major tournaments come, because those contracts are signed 20 years prior to the actual event. And so that is the explanation for it and of what it is, and then the rationale that went into putting it in a bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Rest. Questions on 17? Representative Gbaji.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that explanation, Senator Rest. I guess I just have a couple of questions, because we actually have had a number of sports tournaments here in Minnesota. I think most recently in Minneapolis, we've had both NCAA tournaments, men's and women's. or maybe not men's, but definitely the women's teams. We've had the gymnastics competition have come either to St. Paul or Minneapolis. We very famously had the Super Bowl here in Minneapolis, and I don't know if we put in separate tax exemptions to try to attract those. Maybe we did, before my time. But at the end of the day, these competitions, I think the point of why we try to attract them, or at least in our city, our mayor has talked a lot about wanting to bring in that economic development into our city, where we have a lot of people come in and they buy things like hotel rooms, they buy food, they buy apparel, items, et cetera. And that's the sales tax that we recruit for the city. So I think also in other parts of the state of Minnesota, we want those festivals and competitions to come in. I guess I'm just a little concerned that if we are giving away tax exemptions, we may be giving away some of the benefit that we would be able to get by attracting those competitions to come into our state. I mean, I think the best way to attract those competitions to come to our state is to show the facilities that we can provide them, which we all know we built the U.S. Bank Stadium, which I think is part of the reason the Super Bowl came here. We have varied other facilities, which is why we continue to bring people here. And so I understand there's probably a couple of golf courses in Minnesota that perhaps the PGA is probably looking at, in addition to the hundreds of sites around the world. But I would think if we lose out, it's probably not because of our tax incentives, but it's because people don't understand the idea of trekking to Minnesota in the middle of nowhere when they could go to Scotland or Abu Dhabi or something like that. So I would just ask a couple more questions as to the necessity of this, particularly if the point is to attract people to come to Minnesota. I think there's many other ways we can do that while still recouping a benefit for the residents of Minnesota.
Thank you very much. Chair Gomez, then Chair Rest.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's true, this is not the largest item on the spreadsheet, but it's one of the hardest, I would say, for our caucus to think about doing, given I'm not going to talk about the grave fiscal situation of our state yet again. I'm not going to talk about the looming Medicaid cuts yet again. What I'm going to say is that if we gave out tax goodies to every interest that swore to us up and down that if you just give us this little tax goodie, we'll bring all this economic development to you, our bank account would be empty. Because that is always the story every single time with one of these things. And so $1.8 million is maybe not a lot. But when you talk about spending $1.8 million, as a giveaway to attendees of the Ryder Cup, at the same time that your spreadsheet carries cuts to LGA, CPA, local homeless prevention aid, and local affordable housing aid, it's really, really hard for us to accept. The Ryder Cup, a ticket costs $750 for one day. I simply refuse to believe that the person who can afford to go to a PGA Cup and buy a $750 ticket just absolutely needs the people of Minnesota to exempt them from like the $40 in taxes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Rest.
Mr. Chairman, that's the kind of criticism that is often used against sports and sporting tournaments that bring not just people who buy the tickets, but the kind of activities that are provided around it. And there is just a disagreement on the economic benefit of being able to bring one of those major, in this instance, major golfing events. And I can assure you that there was a lot of public money spent on bringing the Super Bowl here and other events that have asked for it's not only private money that's being used, but the other contributions from local governments, because indeed it brings a lot of activity and hotels and so forth. And so the cities are not reluctant particularly to participate in that. But, you know, I recognize difference of opinion about the economic value of supporting these events.
Thank you, Chair Rest. And I would like to make a couple comments on this. And this is probably the best bargain of anything we're looking at in this tax bill, other than maybe data centers or something. But this, we are getting this on the cheap. This is the bargain of the day. We are looking at, from what I understand, it's sales tax exemption on tickets to the event. That's it. That's all we're out. And this will bring in millions and millions and millions of dollars. Not only that, but the exposure Minnesota gets from the worldwide TV audiences. This is going to make it so we're not another Kansas, is what this does. And I love Kansas. Oh, the emails are coming.
Yeah, careful.
I love Kansas dearly. Got relatives out there. It's just awesome place. Minneapolis, Kansas is where one of them lives. And then that's actually a town. They have a pizza, so they have arrived. But this issue on the PG sales tax, the money this is going to bring in is just unbelievable. I would hope this is one that, well, I don't know, everybody's going to get behind it, but I'm behind it 100%, and I know a good deal when I see it, and this is a good deal. Any other comments on that? Chair Gomez.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if nonpartisan can tell me whether it's just tickets to these specific events that's exempted. I'm just remembering when we had our hearing on this, just some conversation about that, so I'm not.
Thank you. That's great. I do want to clarify that. I don't want to misspeak on that. Who would have that shot?
Or maybe Miss
Pollack. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. It's a set of provision. Ms. Pollack.
Mr. Chair and Representative Gomez, the exemption would apply to the granting of the privilege of admission to a PGA tournament and to related events sponsored by the PGA.
Okay, Chair Gomez.
Thank you. Yeah, we weren't really able to establish exactly what those related events were, but it just want to say this is like a little more broad than just those specific tickets to those events. And I want to mention that the reason
And
that
Chair
it's.
Gomez, I stand corrected.
I would never,
corrected.
Mr. Chair.
But I wish I could
just that-
stand. But that's the other thing. Chair Gomez.
Just that the reason there's the $1.8 million revenue estimate is because the Ryder Cup's coming here already. Like, we don't have to bribe them to come, they're coming. So, thank you.
Okay, and again, this is one that I really do like, and from what I understand, there's a tremendous amount of competition, and if we can get them here for the little bit that's in this bill, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I think Whistling Straits and in Wisconsin, and I don't want to lose these events to Wisconsin. That would just cause me more pain than my heart could bear. Okay, let's go to 18. And this is my error here, sustainable airport fuel.
It's not airport
It's airline
fuel.
fuel, isn't it?
No, it's aviation fuel.
Aviation, oh, I
It's
was
not
really
fuel for the
messed up.
airport.
Sustainable aviation. I'm not sure how you're gonna fuel airports, but okay. Sustainable aviation fuel, thank you, my apologies. Okay, whose has that one? That'd be
It's over
over
here.
at Chair Rest.
Well, this is also a priority of the governor's, and which I have been working with certainly also on, and certainly Senator Dibble and Senator Putnam, Senator Frantz of, it is an opportunity to manufacture with lots of guidelines a fuel that can take the place of jet fuel, which is based on fossil fuels, and to replace that in our airlines and airplanes, and Delta Airlines and has been very active here, making and attracting aviation interests across the world, quite frankly, to make it a SAF hub. And particularly Airbus is very interested in the largest airplane manufacturer in the world, has been working to emphasize Minnesota as the place to be for SAF and the agricultural interests up and down the state of Minnesota, particularly looking to a new crop that's a cover crop, a winter crop that can be it's attractive because of the minimum amount of water used to grow it. But Senator Putnam also can give you some more information about that. And Senator Kupak has also been involved greatly in this, because a production plant is in the works for some $600 million, as I recall, out near Moorhead. So it's a real opportunity for us to reduce our carbon imprint. And there is a SAF plant that the governor, as well as business interests, recently visited in the Netherlands. And so this fuel is being made right now, and it has a great future, not only lots of guardrails, but not only for aviation. Unfortunately, it's because of the molecular structure, as I understand it, it is not. It is just as heavy as jet fuel, so it is not an opportunity to make planes lighter, but which means the amount of fuel you can put in them, the planes can go farther. We cannot get a flight right now from South Africa to nonstop to Minnesota. They can go to the eastern cities, but not as far into the Midwest that they could come to MSP. But it's a very exciting opportunity. It's being worked on very carefully, and I would turn to. I'm a fangirl of this, and so I will turn to, if with your permission, to Senator Putnam to maybe give some more details about SAF.
Senator Putnam. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Rest. Maybe a year and a half ago, I was talking with our pal Jeff Davidman at Delta. So any of the math that I give you or any of the stuff I say that's wrong is his fault. Maybe it's a little bit of my fault for being gullible, but some of the stories he's told me about SAF are incredible and remarkable. Delta a couple years ago tried to decarbonize their fleet. So they put all kinds of effort. When you go on a Delta plane anytime soon, virtually everything you touch is going to be recycled. They did tremendous work to try and decarbonize their planes. After all that work, they decreased their carbon footprint by about 1%, because 98% of Delta's carbon footprint comes from the jet fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel is a profound intervention that is one of the best things we can do for the environment in like 6 different ways. And yet we don't have enough of it right now. Right now we produce enough sustainable aviation fuel for just Delta for 3 days out of the year. This is an incredible opportunity to have a significant impact, positive impact on the climate. And that's just talking about the carbon footprint of the airlines themselves. When we think about some of the new crops that have been developed, winter camelina is the plant that Senator West was mentioning, developed at the University of Minnesota. That crop itself is a cover crop. The benefits to Minnesota agriculture are themselves profound as well. What that does to reduce erosion, the new crop, and when you have a new crop like that that's so good for the environment, farmers and other folks need an incentive to grow it. They need a market to sell it in, and this sustainable aviation fuel is that market. Now, there has been some discussion and controversy, a little slight controversy over the feedstock of sustainable aviation fuel. Should it just be this plant or that plant? I remember what I just said a couple minutes ago, and that's that 3 days of fuel just for Delta is what we have right now. This isn't a kind of all feedstock option in a number of ways. And some people are legitimately concerned that as soon as you can grow corn, for example, and turn into sustainable aviation fuel, everyone's going to turn every single forest in the state into corn. That didn't happen with ethanol. That's not going to happen here. And even more importantly, over the past couple of weeks, people have been working together to come up with a legitimate compromise on the question of feedstock. And that compromise has been reached. Environmentalists with concerns, everyone should be an environmentalist, but specific environmental organizations with concerns about different feedstocks that might go into SAF have been at the table, have worked with Delta, have worked with Minnesota Corn, with other kinds of organizations, and they've come up with an excellent compromise that protects some of our concerns or mitigates some of our concerns about potential environmental impacts of new crops being grown this way or that way. But this is one of those situations where we have an opportunity to do tremendous economic, cultural, and environmental good at the same time with no drawbacks. And the process that came up with this plan, again, a deeply democratic one where everyone was at the table, where decisions were made and negotiated in great faith, not just good faith, but great faith. And so I think that we have an obligation to support sustainable aviation fuel in the state of Minnesota.
Thank you, Senator Putnam. Any other comments on SAF, Representative Baji?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the comments from Senator Putnam. I do agree. I mean, I do think that there's definitely some promise here for, getting to a more sustainable fuel. And, I think that that's really important to explore. I guess my question just is, with all questions in this area is, while we still don't have a complete proof of concept yet, or, we're moving in the right direction, how much should the state be investing in this? And, kind of what those numbers are, making sure it's the right balance. I think that's just something to consider because, one of the things I've seen on the back end is like right now there's still a lot of fuel costs, fossil fuel costs in transporting some of the materials to grow some of these cover crops, and then also transporting some of these materials to get into to get the sustainable aviation fuel to where it needs to go. So I think as we think about it, like, how do we make sure that the whole process is green from start to finish? I think another thing to also consider too is like how to better tie this to regenerative farming goals, making sure that, this can also be another opportunity to ensure that our agriculture system is also becoming much more eco-friendly as well. And so I do think there are definitely some steps in the right direction for this and would be interested in exploring further. It was my first year on the Ag Committee, and so I really appreciated those conversations, I think. But I think the question is just what is the right balance to strike for our state dollars, considering all the other pressing needs that we have in areas that direct people much more immediately than aviation fuel.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you for those comments, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that on the question of the cost of transportation, I think that's a valid concern. But anytime you move anything anywhere, there's going to be a cost of transportation. And this is a new crop. Winter camelina in particular is a new crop. We are incentivizing the production of that crop, which in and of itself is going to have a tremendous economic impact on, not just economic, but also cultural impact. One of the challenges with cover crops across the state is having something you can do with them. A lot of farmers will farm cover crops tomorrow if they find a viable way to make them profitable. This is that way. And a brand new airline jet can operate on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. It doesn't need to be blended with fossil fuels to any extent at all. Like, this is a way, I hate to be melodramatic or hyperbolic, but sustainable aviation fuel is one big step towards saving the planet, both in terms of the fuel of the plane itself, but also as an incentive to some of the more regenerative practices that we were just mentioning. I had a meeting with Cargill, of all people, about 1.5 years ago, and sustainable aviation fuel was changing their conversation around regenerative agriculture because of this fuel. So I see it as a win in every single direction. I understand every decision we make is a kind of math problem of looking at benefits versus costs. To me, the benefits of this economically, but most importantly environmentally, way outweigh the potential costs.
Senator Hochschild?
Mr. Chair, I was, well, first of all, I can't overcome the eloquence that Senator Putnam brought to this discussion and all the work that he has put into it. But I would just point out that we did hear during testimony in the Senate that there's also the opportunity to use wood biomass or wood products in this. So to Senator Putnam's point about the concerns around forests becoming ag land and reductions in that, I think that would be relatively unfound, given that that would actually be a product for sustainable aviation fuel. And I would just point out, we've had some pretty historic wildfires up in northern Minnesota over the last several weeks. And it was reported in the Star Tribune or New York Times, one of the two, that in fact, part of the reason the wildfires occurred is because we don't have enough wood processing happening in northern Minnesota. The Verso plant in Duluth went down. I know we provided incentives. Representative Olson, former Representative Olson worked hard on getting that incentive package. That paper mill is back up and running. However, the delay and the lack of processing of wood up in northern Minnesota actually left a lot of debris that resulted in more wildfire happening in northern Minnesota. So my point being, we have a lot of way to go in northern Minnesota to use our wood products, and I think this is just another example of where we could supply sustainable aviation fuel. Or, Mr. Chair, we could use helium. I don't know, maybe.
It's good in balloons, yeah. Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wonder if, I've talked to our fiscal staff about this, but I don't know, since it's a Senate provision, if I should ask the Senate fiscal staff just about what the cost of this is, what the cost of what we did in 2023 was, because we passed not in the tax conference committee report, it was an item that went into the transportation bill as a study and came out as a tax credit that we never took a look at, interestingly. I can't imagine why. I'm wondering if you can tell me about what that action that we took in 2023 was, what the cost, kind of the cost, or because these are capped credits, is my understanding. They're sort of like a fixed cost, and then what the proposal is this year. Or I don't know if either.
Mr. Sylvia or Mr. Munn?
Mr. Chair, Representative Gomez, I don't have the information in front of me about what this cost when it was enacted in 2023. The current cost of the modifications that were proposed in the Senate bill is $14.8 million over 4 years, and that's the same as the governor's budget proposal.
Chair Gomez.
Mr. Chair, could we ask Ms. Templin that question?
Ms. Templin?
Chair Gomez and Chair Davids, the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Credit was enacted in 2023, and the current law cost for the credit was, the allocation in 25 was 7.4 million, and in 26 it was 2.1 million, and in 27 it was 2.1 million as well, for a total over those 3 years of 11.6 million. The proposal that the governor had also increases the credit, and the cost of the credit is also extended to fiscal year 35. The cost of the credit with the extension through 2035 is 39 million.
Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so of those credits that have been allocated, that were allocated in 2023, how much of that amount has been expended so far?
Ms. Templin?
Madam Chair and Chair Davids, how much has been expended now? I believe that there's been very little usage of the credit because production hasn't gone online and will not go online until 2026.
Chair Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we passed $11.6 million of this in 2023. $0 of it have been used so far, and now we have a new proposal in front of us asking for an additional $14.8 million before any of the existing credit that was identified in the 2023 bill has been used. And so that's curious to me. And, you know, I think I'm glad we had a good conversation so far about, kind of about this issue in general. I would say that, you know, I've read a lot of interesting perspectives on this, and, you know, the goals that are identified in the governor's budget for sustainable aviation fuel is 11 million gallons by 2028. And in 2024, we produced 5,000 gallons. 1 million acres of plants would be needed to meet that need. We talked about winter camelina and pennycrest. Is that what it's called?
Pennycress.
Pennycress, excuse me. I know, I think I always say it wrong. As, you know, I think they're kind of oil seeds. They're winter cover crops. They require it kind of like it doesn't really pencil out to produce them at this point, and so they require subsidy, and that the scale up, you know, when we have 24.5 million acres of active farmland in Minnesota, like the idea of somehow getting this million acres into winter camelina and pennycress, I think there's a question as to whether that's going to happen. And I think that the question that Representative Agbaje raised is the one that we should be thinking about, which is, you know, is this the right use of the money? How much public subsidy will it take to actually scale this industry up to the point that people are talking about? And is that what we should be doing with our dollars in this moment? So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Gomez, just think of it this way. Data centers start out at 5 million. Look at them now.
Mark me down as a Navy, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Now, anything else on the staff? Okay, I'm a stickler. I'm sorry. Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I just really quickly. So one of the technicalities here is that as a cover crop, I totally get your point about the number of acres, but this is an additional growing season. So you don't have to take other stuff out of production to do it. And you're spot on about our lack of capacity to produce it. But that's something that we're working on right now. And other states are trying to do that too. So, but I totally get that. I completely understand your question about the value of the expense. But I think there's different ways to look at this. I mean, if we said it's going to cost us $14 million to get rid of 1% of global CO2 emissions, I would pay that, right? And right now, commercial airlines are about 3 to 4% of global CO2 emissions. So it's not a perfect solution, right? But I do think it's something that we really need to take very seriously. And that's all I got. And again, thanks for the conversation.
Chair Gomez. We have to realize that a lot of these cover crops are grown in Kansas and they'd have to be transported. So.
Via pipeline, hopefully.
Okay, now, I am a stickler. We're going to skip around here a little bit because my goal is to get us out of by 5:30 to start our holiday weekend. Yeah, I know, it's 4:30 somewhere. Okay. So I'm not going to make my goal, but in fairness to Chair Gomez, and I'll explain what I'm doing here, but first of all, I'm a stickler for accuracy, and our wonderful nonpartisan staff on the House side told me that the Pizza Hut in Minneapolis, Kansas is closed. And I really think it's because the legislature didn't pass a PGA sales tax exemption in Kansas. I really believe that. So what I'd like to do, and then we'll turn it over to Chair Rest to give us an out or what we're looking at possibly on Tuesday. But I had a lot of my stuff up here that I was very curious of. I didn't, I think Chair Gomez, if you could maybe do 22 through 24. 25 is the airport properties, that's Duluth, St. Cloud, Rochester, I think, right? But these, the 22 through 24 are kind of yours, and I don't want to be skipping over your items.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This work group just hasn't heard enough from me today, huh? Okay, so item 22 is direct file. And that's a position that the House brought in our bill. And so right now, this was interestingly one of, I think it was my first year when I was like, I have this kind of ignorant question about taxes. Why do we have to fill out forms? Like other places in the world, they just, because if you ever filled out your tax forms wrong, like they know. They send you a bill if you mess it up, or they send you like, hey, you calculated this wrong. And so that was kind of just one of my questions was like, why do we even have to fill out these forms? Other places in the world, they send you a statement because they collect all of the information that they need. And it wasn't that ignorant of a question, it turned out, because the reason that we have, like we've developed this whole we've developed this whole system. It's one of the basic things that the IRS at the national level and the Department of Revenue at the state level does. People have to pay their taxes. It's a requirement under law. And we have kind of outsourced that to very large corporations. And so this basic function of government, collecting taxes, is actually performed by these big corporations. And I use, regular software to file my taxes. A couple years ago, I read this interesting article in the Washington Post around tax time. And what it said was, don't give TurboTax your data. And it identified that the very first question that you're asked when you sign into the most often used tax preparation data or tax preparation software is, can we use your data? And they couch it in this very clever way. They say, in order to kind of like fill out your tax forms in the most accurate way possible, may we share your data with our partners. What that means is that they're selling your data, your data related to filing your taxes. Intuit has been been fined tens of millions of dollars for deceptive business practices by federal agencies. If you've used their software, then you know, even if you income qualified for a free product, you have to opt out of a paid product over and over and over and over again. And what investigations have shown is that most people don't make it through those 7 or 8 times you have to say no without saying yes, because they're like, don't you want your biggest refund? Don't you want us to do the best possible job that we can for you? Just give us $29.99 and we'll do the best possible job that we can for you. The best possible job of a basic function of government that we have outsourced to corporations that are stealing our data, engaging in deceptive business practices, pushing paid products onto consumers when they qualify for a free product. And so what this does is establishes something that we could do all along, which is to have a very similar kind of consumer experience with an internet-based filing software, but that's developed by the state and everybody can use for free. There was a pilot of this at the federal level a couple years ago. The current administration is apparently suspending it, but people who've used it say it's really great. We weren't part of the pilot. There was an initial list of states that were invited to participate in the pilot program. And that initial group of states were the ones who had their own state level direct file program already available to their residents. And so we were not a part of that group because we don't have that. And that's what this effort would do, is it would set up that free program that's easy to use for taxpayers around the state of Minnesota without having to go through opting out of selling your data, ducking the 7 attempts to get you into the paid product at $29.99 or $49.99 or $79.99. And where, you know, that consumers could have, taxpayers, residents of Minnesota, could have confidence in putting their information into that system and knowing that the entity that's collecting their information, that their prime directive is not to make profit, but to ensure that taxes are collected in a fair and equitable manner. And so that's the direct file.
Okay, Chair Gomez, you're going to go the next one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
If you
okay.
want.
But before we do that, I'd just like to get some clarification on a letter that I received, and I guess we both received, plus Chair Rest on the 20th. If the department could just weigh in a little bit on their thoughts on this.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So as you know, I did send a letter to all 3 chairs. And so right now, the IRS has a direct file system. And if the state of Minnesota can link in, and when we do our own, if we were to do our own Minnesota direct file system, if we can link with the IRS system, we can develop and produce and implement a direct file system that would create excellent taxpayer experience and good tax code security and integrity. The big question out there is that the federal government has had this going for 2 years, the IRS, and what we're hearing, the Treasury Secretary and coming from the IRS, is they're not going to continue it for next year. I don't think that's official right now, but they're right now looking if not. And so while the Department of Revenue, we can implement and work a Minnesota direct file system without being linked to the federal government. However, our concerns are it will have adverse impact on taxpayer experience and also security and integrity of the tax code. So let me just give you a couple quick examples. So right now, the IRS has a very sophisticated system that really can review data and look at ID theft and look at fraudulent potential behavior. That before that comes to the state of Minnesota, they've already kind of taken that look at that. The IRS also cross-references data with the Social Security Administration. So verifying names and date of birth and so forth. There's also a modernization e-file authentication system that the IRS has that will correct errors before they're sent to the state of Minnesota in ours. So what it creates for us is that taxpayers may then actually have to put in their own information. But what we would need to do at an increased cost would be, since we're kind of losing a layer of security, we would have to develop and do that. We can do that, as I said before. It just, we're going to lose a little of that protection that I think is really important. And maybe the last thing would be is that it would, without being linked to the federal IRS direct file system, there's going to be an extra step for taxpayers. So where, like currently, if you're working through a vendor or whoever, once you filed your federal return, you then would select your state, and then that vendor would just kind of link it with the feds and the state, that one return, and then you'd file your federal and state return. Without being linked to the feds, what has to happen is you'll file your federal return, and then you'll have to take your data and now go to the Minnesota direct file system. So there could be another step. But again, I want to say we can do that. I want the committee to know that, but it would create, we are concerned that it does create some taxpayer experience concerns and potentially some security concerns. And then the last and final thing would be certainly having the ongoing funding. That would be crucial to have permanent ongoing funding. Because I think once you start something, you wouldn't want to stop it at that point. But our department's main concern is that taxpayer experience. We want to make sure if we have a system and we create it, that it is good experience for the taxpayer and protecting all the data we have and making sure we prevent and stop fraud. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's go, and I apologize if some of you wanted to weigh in on a couple of these here, but 23, Chair Gomez.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a provision that, you know, that I put in my 2024 tax bill, and I wasn't quite able to get Chair Davids to agree with me on this one, so I appreciate you, because it's not actually being carried in my bill, in our bill, but I appreciate you just giving me the chance to talk about it a little bit today. So the local homeless prevention aid was, I've talked about it a couple times, but was established in, I think, 2021. And it has an 8-year sunset on it, and that was sort of part of the negotiation that happened around that tax bill that year. There are other local aids that expire, but they're mostly for really specific activities. Like there's a 4D transition aid that when we made the big 4D change that we knew was going to do some property tax shifting for certain communities that we established, you know, but for, it's unusual for an aid like this that is designed to address what is unfortunately in our state an ongoing problem, child homelessness. It's unusual for it to expire. That's an unusual sort of design for local aids. And so I have been working to try to get the sunset on the homeless prevention aid lifted for the last couple of years. And for that to be an ongoing allocation to that purpose to counties, because unfortunately, homelessness isn't going to go away anytime soon, and child homelessness isn't going anywhere. And so we know that this is, you know, really is an issue that our counties and our school districts a lot of times are the folks who are really right there on the front lines. Because, you know, as I mentioned before, this is really targeted at kids, and an acknowledgement that the instability of, you know, experiencing homelessness when you're a kid just has all these reverberations in your life. One of the things I learned was that you are 20 times more likely to be homeless as an adult if you experience an episode of homelessness, even a brief one with your family when you're a little kid. And so this is like lifelong damage that we're trying to prevent, and generational, multi-generational damage that we're trying to prevent when we make interventions to try to prevent kids from being homeless. And you know, this actually was the way that I originally designed it. Then Chair Marquardt changed it because there is some responsiveness to like the number of homeless kids that are in each county. But what I think was really wise was that every single county, all 87 counties, get something out of this aid. And because all 80s and it's very flexible because each county has unique challenges with related to homelessness and unique local solutions. And so, you know, when Mower County came in 2024 to tell us, I mean, they get like 10, 12 grand. I mean, it's not a lot of money. And they talked about being able to go and, you know, a family sleeping in a van, and they can get them into stable housing temporarily so that then they can work with them and get them the supportive services that they need to move them toward a permanent and safe place for that family with those kids to live. And it's really like the flexibility of it means that, you know, we heard from Senator Hauschild from St. Louis County, the unique challenges of rural homelessness and how it looks very different than it does in my neighborhood. And but that county was able to meet their own local challenges around, you know, around rural homelessness, around substance use disorder, around the necessity of providing culturally appropriate interventions to people. And so, you know, I just want us to, like we've talked about a lot of issues today. A lot of issues that are of interest to the committee and we talked about economic competitiveness and how it is that we attract businesses here and how we're going to use our public dollars to incentivize, golf PGA to come here, to incentivize sustainable aviation fuel and data centers and all these things. And as we have those discussions, all of which are maybe like much more high profile and, much more, there's a lot more lobbyists here who care about that than who are here to talk about child homelessness. And so, I just want us all to remember that, to remember this important work that happens all across the state and that is enabled by this flexible local aid. And I hear all the time from local governments and from service providers who are grateful to us for deciding to intervene in this way. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And then 24, if you could, that's a very important one that we take care of that.
Yeah, okay, so I'll try to go through this, and if I get anything wrong, I think Mr. Cope will be listening to correct me if I do anything wrong. So there's Alliance Housing is 501c3 Institute of Public Charity, and they have for a long time provided income tested housing to low income individuals. Deeply affordable housing, I think this is like 30% and less of area median income. People who really need an affordable place to stay. The kind of custom, I don't know if custom is the right word, the practice of counties has been to include low-income apartments in their calculation of the market, that they have market value and they are liable for property taxes. Alliance Housing filed a lawsuit against Hennepin County saying our provision of this affordable housing is core to our charitable mission, and so that activity is exempt, and so that property should be exempt. And the courts agreed with Alliance Housing. What that does, though, is it puts, so it means that the entity that owns the housing is exempt and thus not liable for property taxes. But in that case, the tenant, the person renting, becomes liable for property taxes, and the apartment is counted as personal property under our state statutes. And so in this case, if this just went forward and the legislature chose not to act, what we would be doing is saying these folks who are making less than 30% of area median income would get a bill for their property tax liability on their apartment that they're renting. That obviously would really be a bummer for those people. And those low-income people then would not be eligible for the renter's credit, which there are families who've been living in this housing for a number of years, and they're, when a low-income family becomes, when a renter's credit becomes part of the family's sort of annual financial plan, it can become really important, because a lot of times it's a couple $1,000s, which if you're not making much and you're raising a family, people put off fixing their car, put off taking their kids in for a haircut or a medical appointment sometimes until they get those, their refundable tax credits in the winter, or their renter's credit, which usually comes right before school goes back in. And so, we're in this situation where if we don't do anything, then the renters have to pay the property taxes. And so what in 2023, we made low-income rental housing that eligible for the 4D property tax classification rate, which is, I think it's weird because it's 0.75 for the lower tier, and then there's a higher tier that's 0.25, as I recall. But so that was actually a really a very preferential tax treatment now for these, for especially for nonprofit kind of low-income housing providers like Alliance Housing. And so what the position that the House brought into conference does is it says that housing should be, does have property tax liability, should be included in the levy, that we should go back to the way that we've been treating that housing for decades. We should make sure that those tenants are not liable for personal property taxes, and we should kind of, those Alliance Housing and other landlords like them are eligible for this very preferential property tax treatment, and that's how, and they should pay into the system. And so that's our approach. I know that the governor's office had a different approach that I think just like it maybe allowed the property to remain exempt, but exempted the tenants from that personal property liability part. But, you know, allowing the property to remain exempt, we're happy that they took care of the renters, because that's like kind of the main thing, right, is we don't want that to happen. But allow, again, you know, not to be a broken record, but allowing property to be exempt just shifts onto other people, onto other low-income people, onto other property taxpayers. And we do not know what the impact of this shift would be if we were to allow nonprofits to say that all of their housing is exempt. We don't exactly know what that shift would be, but we have concerns about it kind of growing. So that's the sort of boring explanation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought it was a page turner. I did.
You were turning the pages on Facebook while we were over there.
I'm not on Facebook,
you're the only one.
Madam Chair. I'm not on Facebook or X or LinkedIn. And I was told by somebody I'd lose the election because of it, and I had higher numbers than ever. I really don't care what somebody had for supper last night. I mean, I care deeply, but when you see pictures, you see. It's weird. Whatever. So I can't, and it's looking forward to a great weekend, headed to White Castle for supper. And just a couple announcements. Get your tax stamps while you still can from Joanna Bears for her illegal drugs. I think it's pot and cocaine. No, not cocaine. What do you call it, Ms. Bears? Controlled substances. Okay, because once this beautiful bill passes, and there's a provision there from Jessica Hansen, Representative Jessica Hansen from Burnsville, that makes it so we don't have to have those stamps anymore. So they will be collector's items. So just like baseball cards, get them now. Okay, I just want to take 1 second before I turn it over to Senator Rest to thank so much our nonpartisan staff and our partisan staff. But our nonpartisan staff, I want to apologize right now, and I hope you can forgive me for what we're about to do to you the next few days. It's going to be a lot of, I hope it's a lot of all-nighters. That means we're making progress, but Senate staff, House staff, you are the best, and I just really appreciate what you do. That being said, I'm going to turn over to Chair Rest, then it'd be my intention to adjourn. Chair Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will not be meeting over the weekend. We will meet again on Tuesday, and we'll let you know when.
Thank you very much. Chair Rest, any final thoughts, Chair Gomez? And Senator Clark, if you could bring a copy of that picture from Senator Clark.
Chair Davids, I think Dwayne Benson is also in that photo. So it will be.
Between, Senator Clark be between 1990 and 94.
I think, well, 1990, I was 6th grade, so I think that was the year.
Okay, for my first year. So I think that picture would also be worth probably one of the tax stamps here. But I think I had hair back then.
You were then and still are a looker.
Okay. With that, thank you for all your work today. With that, good government all the time. We are adjourned.